Okay, hello. It is time to update the silent tier list because it's been entirely too long. This character for a very long time, as I said in the overexplain run, was very uninteresting, I think, for a lot of the top players, and so we have sort of defaulted to just ignoring it. I don't think that's true anymore. So now that there's a lot of new ideas, I feel very differently about the character and also have some new ideas and some feedback from previous tier lists to go off of. I think we can make this one a lot better. As always, with every tier list, I'm just going to say, don't build your deck based on a tier list. It's meant to be a way to yap and talk about each card and sort of talk about their use cases and when they might be strong or bad. Slay the Spire is just a game where stuff in D tier gets picked over stuff in S tier sometimes. That's just how the game is. The more you learn about the game, the more you recognize when bad stuff is good and when good stuff is bad. As a starting point of reference, you can sort of just pick all the good cards. Getting past that level of gameplay is when you start getting into more fun runs. This video is brought to you by Boot.dev, an online coding academy that makes learning how to code easy. I used to code back in college for engineering school, but that has been a really long time ago, so I've basically forgotten everything. That's why I feel confident in saying that even if you don't know anything about coding, but you're looking to get into it for a job, a side hustle, or just to understand how things work, that Boot.dev will be great for your learning. It's an extremely useful skill that you will be glad to have. I did really enjoy my time learning how to program, and Boot.dev has made my much needed refresher very simple. Their interface turns classes into an RPG-like game where you earn experience for completing lessons and get to do exactly what you'll be expected to do at a job, making projects and writing real useful scripts. Whatever projects you make while completing courses, you can use as a portfolio to show employers when it's time to apply for jobs. And even if you're not trying to go into the workforce and you just want to work on a side project for fun, like a mod for your favorite game, then Boot.dev will be right up your alley. You can use my code in the description below or scan the QR code on screen for 25 off your annual plan. Thanks so much to Boot.dev for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to the tier list. Let's go ahead and talk about what S tier means. So S tier is essentially almost always positive. I'm going to say like 95+% of the time is good in your deck. Or it serves an irreplaceable function that other cards cannot do, or solves some sort of enemy in the game that the character specifically struggles really hard with. One example would be something that solves the Aeonglass, or something that solves Act 1 on a character that's like bad in Act 1. Basically an exceptional card. A tier is not always going to be quite that level of power. This could be a card that is sometimes only good early game and not really picked outside of early game, or it could be something that is only really something you want in the end game, might be very bad early, but eventually becomes really good. In general, I would say this is probably a card that is positive in your deck 85% of the time or more, but it could be at different points of the run, not so good or very good. And we will talk about that when it comes up. As I'm placing cards, I'm going to go ahead and mention when the use cases are. So again, just pay a lot of attention to what is being said about the card rather than where it ends up. B tier is sort of run of the mill, solves a particular problem or maybe a handful of problems, or maybe is just like an okay damage card, for example. Something that is maybe not exceptional very frequently, but has really high highs, maybe also has lows where it's completely useless. It could be any range in between. Again, we'll talk about it. C is going to be cards that are probably below average or the majority of the time not positive in your deck. So less than 50% pick rate probably. This could be something that has really niche interactions with maybe relics that make it really good, or other cards that make it really good that are not always in your deck. But if you have like two things together, it can be exceptional. So it does not mean bad, just means picked less often. And again, I think all these letters really represent is how often it ends up in the deck. At least that's how I'm going to define it. I don't think there's a perfect way to do a Slay the Spire tier list, but that is how I'm defining it. And we'll go ahead and just move on from there. D is going to be something that is very rarely picked, probably less than 15 or 10% of the time. So not a perfect like graph here, bell curve, I guess. This is probably a card that almost never gets in the deck or is mostly negative. Could have very niche situations where it is like the best thing of all time and you're super happy to pick it, but generally just not all that great. So what happened since last time compared to now? Aeonglass is in the game. Silent has had a slew of nerfs and buffs and reworks. As far as this is concerned, these card images and everything are going to be main branch text. I will, however, be evaluating and will put cards on screen that are the beta versions. I will talk about them when they happen, but we will evaluate the cards in the current context of the beta branch. And maybe I'll do a little bit of back and forth to talk about both as well, main branch and beta branch. I also wanted this time to split things up into different categories. I think it's probably helpful that we do it, one, alphabetically, but two, maybe go through all the attacks, all the skills, all the powers separately so you can sort of compare across categories of cards. Of course, like skills can do damage and attacks can do, other things like block or whatever, or draw. They don't always necessarily do the same thing, but I think it could be helpful maybe to see the difference between certain cards together that are more similar in function. It's a lot easier to look at two cards that do very similar things and then say, well, one of these is clearly better than the other. I'm going to be accounting for rarity as well. Cards that you see very frequently that can solve problems, going to be very good. Common cards might get a bump if they are doing really well, even if a rare card technically outclasses it, because you're just way less likely to see the rare. And rares also have a lot of opportunity cost. You're seeing them up against other rares very often at the end of the act. And that can mean that you're evaluating them against other rares. And basically every card that you pick inside the Spire is always opportunity cost, unless you transform into it. If you're picking against boss cards or cards in a shop, you could be spending your money on something else, or picking a different rare card, or picking another card in your card selection screen in general. So there's a lot of things that can go into it. Again, tier lists are not a perfect way of representing information in this game. I'm well aware of this. No one needs to tell me that, and it has been this way forever. But this is a way to organize my thoughts and sort of make it more clear, I think, how I feel about things generally. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with attacks and just go alphabetically here. We're going to start with Assassinate. So Assassinate says 0 energy, attack, innate, deal 10 damage, apply 1 vulnerable exhaust. The upgrade goes to more damage as well as more vulnerable to 2 vuln. This card, you can sort of think about it as Backstab. The number is actually lower than Backstab in terms of raw damage. And so if you are only playing one attack, and this is the only attack you're playing, and you don't care about the artifact strip or the debuff at all, then this is technically worse Backstab. I think Assassinate suffers from one thing in particular, which is that you usually see it at the end of Act 1, and it's already starting to fall off a tiny bit. If you see it inside of Act 1, you're going to be playing attacks alongside it very frequently, and it's going to be very, very strong for you. So I think Assassinate is obviously an exceptional card if you get it early. It can lead to very explosive turn ones. Notably combines well with Backstab and performs a very important function even in the endgame, which makes it fall off less than Backstab, which is that it strips artifact. And Aeonglass, as we all know, has artifact charges that you need to get rid of. Silent relies very heavily on weakness, as well as block with a piercing wail or a malaise or any sort of other thing. You even need to strip artifact to apply poison, which is actually pretty relevant now. So I think Assassinate, unlike Backstab, kind of retains value throughout the run. You may think that, it just gets out of your hand and it's not so bad. I'm referring to Backstab here. If you exhaust it, but it is one draw that you're not getting into your deck. So if your deck is relying on powers or needs to do something else in order to set up and really function, then these cards can be not very good. I think it is good that we're talking about these two cards kind of alongside each other. They are next to each other here. I'm going to go ahead and put Assassinate into A. If you get it early, it is exceptionally strong, and again, doesn't fall off as hard. It's not a card that you always want, especially considering that you're seeing it up against other rares. And if you see a card that solves output, for example, you get a Wail plans, or you get a footwork, or you get fumes, or something else that actually like scales into a fight that can solve something for you, Assassinate's outclassed. This is front load, first and foremost. Once you play it, it doesn't do anything really the turn after. This is just helping you in the beginning of a fight, and after that doesn't do anything. There's a lot of spots, especially later on in the run, where that is no longer relevant, and it's worth skipping it just to draw one extra card closer to your powers. So if you don't need front load, doesn't do anything. That's why we're throwing it into A. It's not an S tier card for me, but is exceptional at the role it does, which is front load. Okay, Next up, we have Backstab. We did mention this briefly. I think this is not really changing from last time either. This is probably just going into B tier as a card that is exceptional early and falls off later throughout the run. You're never really seeing Backstab in Act 3 and picking it. You are also sometimes not picking Backstab early game because it can brick block. It can also break you again from drawing into your powers. And so if your damage is good enough and your front load is good enough, say you have some relic that covers front load damage, you may not need a Backstab. There are times where you basically just need to say, is the enemy dead that I want to be dead on turn 1? Yes or no. If the answer is yes to that, you don't need this card. So if you're capable of outputting a decent amount of damage on turn 1 without it, better just to skip it most of the time. I will say that Silent does like these sorts of 0 energy innate cards because of Bag of Prep. And so if Backstab was on another character, drawing 4 is really bad. It bricks your block very often. Silent doesn't have this problem and also suffers from another problem of really being bad at generating energy. I think it's more acceptable for Silent to carry this, and this tends to be positive more often than not. So I'm going to put it into B tier. I think Assassinate is almost always strictly better, even including the opportunity cost of it being a rare card, but it is a little bit closer. I think Assassinate is probably bottom of A tier. Backstab is like top of B for reference later. Okay, next up, we have Dagger Spray. 1 energy, deal 4 damage to all enemies twice. Dagger Spray, again, in the first game was not very good. In this game, you need AoE a lot more often, and I think inside of Act 1, this is something I don't really mind picking up anymore. Again, as you progress throughout the run, you are less likely to need attacks, and you're more focused on doing some sort of engine with your deck to solve output. Like Dagger Spray inside of Aeonglass or Test Subject is really not doing anything for you. You kind of want this in the first act only, and then after that, basically never again. You also can solve AoE in other ways, and once AoE is solved, even inside of Act 1, you do not want to pick this up. So I think this is similar to Backstab. It's definitely worse than Backstab, just because of the energy cost, and again, Silent struggles with energy pretty frequently. So I'm going to throw this into B tier, but it's going to be bottom of B tier for sure. Okay, next up, Dagger Throw. 1 energy, draw 1 card, discard 1 card, deal 9 damage. A couple things since last time. Sly has been nerfed pretty hard. A few of these are direct card nerfs, including like damage from, say, Flick-Flack, and a few other things. The other more important thing is that the style of deck that wants to be doing things with Sly is generally a deck that builds very small looping synergies because you need to line up combos. Like Dagger Throw, to be a good card, needs to be lined up with something else. And even then, it is not the best in its class at doing that. To me, Dagger Throw is something I very rarely pick. It is desperation early game damage. If I have not seen damage, I will pick this up. But say, for example, on floor 1, it's possible in some maps that are not super dangerous and I'm not extremely desperate, or maybe I have a shop early, that I just skip this card. Raw skip. Against other things, I just don't even pick it. I don't want to pay the energy for it, because I'm very often not building these small looping decks anymore. I think the introduction of Aeonglass really makes it hard to do that. You're going to have your shuffle be kind of diluted with a bunch of status cards, and you really need to have a way of fixing that problem. Silent just discards the statuses, and that's fine, but I don't want to pay 1 energy to do that and not have another relevant effect, really. Dealing 9 damage in the endgame is not really a relevant effect for 1 energy. So even though it discards a Wither, I just don't really care. I think this card is C tier for me. It is not like a terrible damage common, but it is really just a damage common. I don't think it has really a high ceiling. If you want to compare it to other discard cards, they're usually just going to be better. And we'll talk about those when we start getting to skills especially. Next up, Dash. 2 energy, gain 10 block, deal 10 damage. 2 energy is a lot for Silent to play. In the first game, this was an exceptional card inside of Act 1. In this game, it doesn't really feel like that's the case. I think Silent has a lot of better options compared to this, and 2 energy is a very steep cost to pay for something if it is not literally solving the turn. And I don't think Dash is very often solving the turn. It's a very dense card, but Silent has Bag of Prep built in, and so dense cards can sometimes be a little bit worse in this character than other characters, and neither number is exceptional for the energy cost. If you only want the damage or you only want the block, then 2 energy is not a good rate for those things. the thing it is good at doing is doing a little bit of everything and not requiring a lot of draws to do that. Like, of course, I can play 2 defends for 10 block, right? That's fine. Or maybe I can play 2 defends that are like upgraded because I have footwork or whatever and block for more than that. But they do eat draws and you're not always likely to draw them together or whatever. So dash is covering you if you have a density problem in terms of block or damage, but it is not exceptional at doing either. I think there's a lot of other uncommons I would way rather have than this, and after about Act 1, it's almost never picked. I think even the high roll of having Necronomicon, which was in Spire 1 and doubled 2-cost cards, is not really in this game. So that hurts dash quite a bit. Snecko is also a relic that is not picked up as often, and especially not on silent in this game, and that was something that made dash a bit better as well. You also don't see 4th energy nearly as frequently and don't pick 4th energy nearly as frequently. And that's where dash gets better because it is much easier to spend 2 energy when you have 4 available instead of just 3. So yeah, to me, Silent does not want this card very often. I think it is probably better than Dagger Throw, especially early, but falls off a bit harder than Dagger Throw in the end game. I just think for what you're wanting to pick both of these cards for, dash is more relevant for longer. Okay, next up, we get to Echoing Slash. This is changed on the beta branch to be uncommon, which is a huge, huge, huge deal. If you compare this to Dagger Spray, unless you have strength or some other like multi-hit benefiting thing, Echoing Slash is strictly better. And now that this is uncommon, you see it way more frequently. You can see it literally on floor 1 or floor 2. You can even see it from Niao, whatever. This card can be your AoE damage solve. And again, once you have something like this, Dagger Spray never gets in, right? So its existence sort of invalidates another card's existence, which automatically means it needs to be higher than that. This card is still probably not S because of its falling off later. But as far as an AoE option is concerned, this is basically the best or one of the best. Just an insane amount of damage, can potentially be doing 30 plus damage in one turn and clearing out a bunch of enemies all at once. This can require a bit of planning, sort of similarly to Regent, where you essentially leave an enemy low enough to trigger Echoing Slash and have it pile on a bunch of times in a turn. So it does need a little bit of forethought. I think this card gets better with player skill and planning, leaving enemies alive for maybe a little bit longer than you need to. You could kill the enemy, but you shouldn't because you know you can draw Echoing Slash next turn, so and so. In my head, this is a very, very strong card, especially at uncommon now, and probably just top of A tier for me. It was already a very good card before, but because you were seeing it at the Act boss before, it was not nearly as relevant as it is now. If you see this inside of Act 1, it is slammed on sight. Very, very, very strong. Okay, next up, Finisher. 1 energy, deal 6 damage for each attack already played this turn. Finisher works notably with something like Blade Dance. Something that plays a bunch of attacks in one turn, and then you deal 18 damage. Maybe you can do more with an upgrade. Maybe you have strength. Maybe you can enchant this. Unfortunately, I think there's a few problems with this. One is when you have Shivs, very often you want to be picking up the Shiv powers. And that makes Finisher much worse. For example, if you have accuracy, you would rather kind of just have 2 leading strikes in your deck rather than a leading strike and a Finisher. Because while there is a high roll situation of playing leading strike into Finisher, one, you have to draw those 2 things together, and that's already sort of living in fantasy land, saying that that's going to happen every single deck cycle. It's just not going to. And 2, this sort of becomes bloat if you don't draw it with other stuff. If you're only drawing it with 1 attack, it's a strike. If you're drawing with 2 attacks and you're willing to play 2 attacks and then also play Finisher, it's still not even really as good. So you sort of need to draw it with other stuff. And I think Silent very often gets to a point where she doesn't want to be playing a whole lot of attacks pretty quickly, where you can sort of do like a blocking thing with poison for a little bit. And then maybe you're just not playing attacks at all, or you're playing like 1 strike whenever you have excess energy. And this can be worse than a strike if you draw it with no attacks in your hand. So I think Finisher, unfortunately, is pretty bad now, and you just don't need the early game damage like you did in Spire 1 to really need to pick this up. Silent didn't hate this in Spire 1. It was actually quite a decent card inside of early game, and it didn't fall off that hard. But in this game, we have so many more things that work with Shivs. We have so many more ways of getting actual damage that we just don't really need Finisher anymore. So yeah, I think this unfortunately is going into D tier. It's pretty bad now. And basically, I never want this almost ever. Again, sometimes niche fringe situations, D tier cards can do the thing. It's just not very often. Okay, Flechettes. 1 energy attack, deal 5 damage for each skill in your hand. This is buffed from Spire 1. I've mentioned this a few times now, but a 1 damage increase on this from 4 to 5 is pretty significant for this card. And I think Silent really likes having multi-hit stuff. You can very often enchant these cards or deal damage with strength. You might say this is somewhat comparable to Finisher and needing to draw it with other stuff in your hand. But I think there's a very significant difference, is that the cards you want to be drawing with Flechettes are cards you actually want in your deck. Very often attacks become the worst cards on a character very quickly. Once you reach a critical mass of attacks, you stop picking them. And so you never want your deck to be drawing all attacks in a turn. And even when you do that, you need energy to play the attacks. Flechettes needs neither. It doesn't need to play other cards beforehand to make it good. It also doesn't need to be drawing a bunch of cards you don't want in your deck. I think it gets a huge boost for those two things. It just needs a lot less to work. If you think about this, just the average case of what you're drawing inside of Act 1, even, half your deck is skills by a default. And so if you say that I draw Flechettes, there's 4 other cards left in my hand to draw, you are about 50-50, right? Your hand is going to be half skills. So you draw 2 skills on this with average, even with a 5-card hand, and Silent has built-in Bag of Prep. And so very often that can be 3 or even 4. And if you combine this with draw cards or even well-laid plans or ways to hold cards in your hand, then Flechettes gets much stronger. And I think that the high roll of getting strength or other things that work with this is very good, while it's also just a really good damage card early game. So it can not fall off. This can be like your entire damage plan. And if it doesn't end up happening, Flechettes is often good enough and really warrants not picking other attacks because it will brick your Flechettes. So very often you get to pick Flechettes and then not add the other attacks into your deck. And that is a power that is very important to mention. Not having to add garbage to your deck is really good. So building a deck with Flechettes in it kind of enables it to just be better all around. I think for that reason, Flechettes is sort of just A tier for me. I don't think it's as good as Assassinate or Echoing Slash. It needs a little bit more work. But the fact that it just doesn't really fall off throughout the run and has a high roll potential of being an exceptional card is important to note. And again, I wanted to call out the similarities between Finisher and Flechettes, but note how they are wildly different cards and their evaluation should differ as such. Okay, next up, Flick-Flack. 1 energy slide, deals 6 damage to all enemies. This was buffed on the beta branch, so it deals more damage now. Flick-Flack unfortunately suffers from this problem that I mentioned before of other cards invalidating it. Dagger Spray is often just going to be better than this. You only have 1 discard card in your starting deck, and because Dagger Throw is not picked very often, and these other sorts of discard cards are not picked very often, or even moved from common to uncommon in the case of Acrobatics, you just have less times where this is going to work. Very often you're just going to be playing this for 7 damage. That in itself is outclassed by Echoing Slash and Dagger Spray. So when you see it like that, it's not going to be all that good for you. Again, you have Survivor in your base deck, so you can get this for 0 energy, but lining those things up, especially if your deck is, a few more cards than just Flick-Flack in the base deck, it's very likely that those cards don't synergize with this at all. And so if you need AoE, you're going to be playing it for its energy cost, which it is just outclassed if that's the case. So in order to be strong, this needs to have a discard engine. The unfortunate problem with that is that discard decks, as I mentioned earlier, are kind of combo decks and need to draw very specific cards together. The payoff for doing that with Flick-Flack is not good enough to warrant it and being in that kind of deck. So this is very much desperation AoE. It is, I didn't see the other options and I will pick it because I need it. But if I am having a deck that is doing this discard engine thing well, this is not the thing that gets in. For that reason, Flick-Flack, very easily bottom of C tier here. It does get in sometimes because you just need AoE, but that's about where it ends. Next up, Grand Finale, 0 energy. Can only be played if there are no cards in your draw pile. Deals 60 damage to all enemies. This was recently buffed. It does more damage, but I think, as a lot of people know, Grand Finale is sort of a card that requires a lot to make work. There's a few things that do make this work. One is if your deck is really small and has draw cards. So again, this discard sort of engine. Grand Finale is a very good payoff for that. The other thing is that if you have Retain, Grand Finale becomes much easier to line up. Notably, Well-Laid Plans now has changed to literally just be the effect of Runic Pyramid, which has always made Grand Finale a much better card for multiple reasons. One, you can sort of just hold the exact number of cards you need in your hand to be able to draw it naturally. You don't even need like draw cards to really line it up or the right number of cards. For example, if I see this early game, I need to think about how many cards are in my deck. And so one thing I'm looking for is like, does my deck have 17 cards in it? Because if it does, I draw 7 turn 1, then 5, then another 5, and I can land this naturally about 1/3 of the time. And with other things, it gets easier, right? And sometimes that's the high roll you need to be able to win. Spire is interesting in the way that high rolling 1 fight out of 4 can be all you need. You don't need to high roll every fight. It doesn't need to work all the time. Sometimes it could just save you a random 20 HP because it works. If that's the case, that 20 HP can be used in the other fights to do other things, or maybe hold a potion, and that can snowball. And so it's difficult to evaluate because I think when people see Grand Finale, they say, oh, well, it didn't work in this fight. And that's sometimes okay. Grand Finale can bail you out of a spot where very few things can bail you out. Grand Finale is one of those cards that can turn a deck that is like almost non-functional, or maybe all it has is Well-Laid Plans and doesn't really have any output, into a deck that can have a lot of output. So I know I just talked about like why Grand Finale can work, and then people are going to be very shocked where I put this, probably. I don't think it's actually a D tier card like it was last time. I also don't think it's like an A tier card or even a B tier card. It's extremely niche that it does the thing. But I do think people underrate this card pretty heavily. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the most broken thing ever, but it can do a job that's very important. Silent can build a small looping deck and kill Aeonglass fast enough before the withers pile up, with Grand Finale as the payoff. This is like Flick-Flack if it was just insane and did 10x more damage. That's basically what it is. It obviously needs a lot more work than Flick-Flack to get working, but if you have, for example, Pyramid or Well-Laid Plans, and you're holding 8 cards in your hand, and you shuffle after playing Grand Finale, you don't have to draw the 8 cards that are in your hand. That means that you can maybe play Grand Finale in the same turn, basically instantly. If your deck is like 15 to 20 cards and some of those cards are powers, or maybe your Center's Bane exhausts or something else exhausts, whatever, you can get down to a deck that's really, really small and sort of play Grand Finale looping things and just kill stuff really, really fast. This was something we did in Spire 1. Again, it was not super frequent that it got into the deck, but when it did, it was very, very strong. And I think because of this, it just deserves to be out of D tier. That's really all I'm saying. I think this card probably gets picked less often than Flick-Flack, but in the spots that it does get picked, it is exceptionally good at doing what it needs to do. That is all I will really say about Grand Finale. Don't sleep on it. I think every time you see it, you should think about whether or not you can land it and how often you can, and maybe it'll be good. It's not going to be correct very often to add it to the deck, but sometimes it is exactly what you need. Next up, we have Leading Strike. 1 energy, deal 3 damage, add 2 Shivs into your hand. Leading Strike is essentially just Blade Dance from Spire 1. A little bit less Shiv synergy. You do not get 3 Shivs, you just get 2. But the first hit of Leading Strike essentially is a Shiv just without synergy space. I think Leading Strike does a couple of things that are really important for this character. One, it is very easy to take this card early game. Without anything else, it just deals 11 damage. And this 11 damage can be split up in a multitude of ways. That makes this very flexible, especially in AoE fights. And it has a very high ceiling of working with a lot of the powers, as well as relics in this game that maybe give you strength, or give you damage on Shivs, or do things when you play 3 attacks in a turn. There's quite a few of those, like Kunai, Shuriken, Ornamental Fan, etc. Leading Strike is kind of the bread and butter of Silent attack comments. This card is probably the card I'm most happy to see on floor 1 in terms of attacks, like common attacks, by quite a bit. I think this is just going into S tier. It's weird because most attacks fall off very hard. Leading Strike does really not. And even against Aeonglass, that sort of like is supposed to punish a bunch of card plays, it's very often that your Shivs are just hitting so hard that you want to play it anyways. And very often a lot of decks will get cross-class synergies, either from relics, the ancient relic in Act 2, from events, from all sorts of things. Shivs have the tendency to sort of just be crazy with every other character's card pool. You can get Dark Embrace, Feel No Pain. You can get regen stuff like Pillar of Creation, Arsenal, right? There's so many cards that just completely break stuff that just makes cards, and cards that exhaust, and cards that hit multiple times. Leading Strike to me is like the epitome of just an attack that does stuff the whole game. And that is not a very common thing. It needs very little to make work and has a super high ceiling while basically never having a really bad floor as well. It's just bread and butter of Silence Kit. I think this card is exceptionally good. Next up, Memento Mori. 1 energy, deal 9 damage, deals 4 additional damage for each card discarded this turn. I recently had a silent run that played Calculated Gamble into Memento Mori, but the Memento Mori was a transform, and I also had Perfect Fit on it. So I can essentially just wait until I was about to shuffle, use Calc Gamble, discard a huge hand, and then always know I was drawing into Memento Mori. And it was sick. It was like doing 55 damage throughout the entire run, if not more. That is not the average run. The average run has no way of really activating this thing super frequently. And as I mentioned earlier, the discard package in general is kind of just way worse than it was on release. It's very often that you're discarding 0 additional cards in your turn, or maybe you're discarding 1. For that reason, I think this card is just not very good. I don't very frequently want to pick a card that says deal 9 damage. It needs to be doing more than that consistently, and it's just not consistent at doing that. This is very much like Finisher, where it lives in sort of this dream world where you want to have a cool combo with it, and it just doesn't happen very often. So unfortunately, I think Memento Mori is going to be D tier. Again, D tier cards are not never. They have their moments. This is just one of those that really doesn't work as often as you need it to in order to justify ever picking it. Maybe early game, if you have like an early prepared, a Dagger Throw for some reason, maybe an Acro, I don't know. You need a lot of stuff for this to be in the deck almost ever. You need to be able to actively proc at least a discard a turn, maybe Tools of the Trade or something. If you have these things, again, discard tends to want to not pick a bunch of attacks and do more powerful things. Maybe you can do Reflex Tactician stuff or other things. There's another card we're going to get to in a second that is kind of just this, but a lot better and more consistent. Okay, next up, we have Murder. 3 energy, deal 1 damage, deals 1 additional damage for each card drawn this combat. Murder is essentially boss killing only. If you are able to draw a ton of cards, you can play this for 3 energy to deal like 50 or something. Unfortunately, I don't think that's very good. There are often other payoffs you can get. Sometimes just playing Leading Strike and playing like 1 or 2 accuracies is way better than this as a looping card. It just costs so much. And obviously early on in the fights, this is taking a long time to ever be meaningful damage. If you have 3 turns without playing draw cards, this does 17 for 3 energy, which is a horrid rate. There is a lot more of cards that we already talked about here in this list that deal more than that for 1 energy, or even less. Sometimes they're free. And so this card is basically never. I think it can be desperation boss killing if you manage to enchant this with like Tanks' double damage enchantment. Sure. It feels to me like that's, again, living in a very, very fantasy land. But off the nature of Aeonglass being what it is, sometimes this gets in the endgame. If you have Snecko, it can get in. And I think there's something to be said about that. Snecko, this is a very, very good card because the cost is randomized and you draw additional cards every turn to scale it faster. So it very quickly becomes a card that just does a lot of damage for a variable energy cost, which is an average of 1.5 energy. If your card is dealing 50 damage for 1.5 energy, that's pretty good. So I think this gets picked more often than the stuff that's in D tier. It's not completely useless, but to me, this is like grand finale tier. It is very, very similar to these cards where sometimes it's exceptionally good. A vast majority of the time, it is completely awful or essentially unpickable. That's very different from something like Flick-Flack and Dagger Throw and Dash in this tier, but they get picked around the same amount. It's just that they're picked in different spots. Okay. We're going to skip over Neutralize since it's in the base deck, but I will just briefly mention that Neutralize is definitely an exceptional card. 0 energy weakness, upgrades to 2 weak, which also carries over your upgrade onto your enchanted starter card if you get that, or upgraded starter card, I should say, rather. Just exceptional card. Definitely S tier. Okay, next up, Pinpoint. 3 energy, deal 15 damage, cost 1 less energy for each skill played this turn. This is essentially what I was just talking about with Memento Mori, but just better. It's Memento Mori that essentially just always works. Pinpoint is a card that I'm exceptionally happy to see early. Silent tends to have this problem of dealing damage while also blocking at the same time. Pinpoint is letting you block while also dealing damage. If you think about like the giant head statue instead of Act 1, something like that could be blocked forever, right? If you have a Footwork Plus and you play 3 defense every turn, you're essentially blocking that fight forever with weakness. That's great and all, but how are you killing it? You essentially can't make any progress if you're just playing defense or backflips or whatever. Here comes Pinpoint, and this is a card that allows you to make progress while also just sort of sitting around and blocking and doing other things that you want to be doing anyways. It allows you to play backflip in your hand and not feel bad about it. Silent is just a very energy starved character and can also work really nicely with something like Prepared, which is 0 energy. It allows you to discount this for free, and Prepared is arguably one of the better skills to be picking up speculatively, especially inside of the discard package. So I think Pinpoint still, even after nerfs a while ago, it's been a long time since I made a Silent tier list, so I'm going to briefly mention that for anyone that was not aware of that. But this used to deal 2 more damage and got nerfed. I think this is still just an A tier card. Probably over Flechettes for me. This is just a bit easier to get working and probably stronger early. It's just going to be doing more damage sooner. Flechettes in the end game is almost always going to be better, but that's fine. When you're picking these cards, they are very often because of early game that you want them, and Flechettes tends to scale better into the end game, but Pinpoint is a stronger early game card, and that's what it's getting picked for. So in the role that these are both being early game damage cards, Pinpoint is better, very slightly. Next up, we have Poison Stab. 1 energy attack, deal 6 damage, apply 3 poison. Easy to read as a card that deals 9 damage, then 11, then 12. So over a couple turns, this deals pretty respectable damage. It's basically comparable to Shiv generating cards in that way. But the Shiv cards, I think, just have much better synergy spaces that work with them, as well as being on the turn that you play them. I will say that the one thing Poison Stab has the Shiv cards don't is that it strips Artifact. And as mentioned earlier, this is pretty important and relevant in this game. But unfortunately, I don't think that's enough. There's other cards that do this better. And with the recent rework of a lot of Silence Poison package, this card doesn't really feel necessary. Catalyst was a big reason why having some random poison in your deck was more okay. Accelerant is not really that. It's just not doing it as well as Catalyst is, and you don't really benefit from having like little amounts of poison that can be amplified. Accelerant just means you lose all your poison stacks. So it can be like a decent early game card that you pick up because you need damage. I think within the first couple of floors, I'm not happy to pick it up, but I will with enough frequency that it gets in inside of some runs. I will say that's like probably under 25%, probably even less than that. So this, by definition of what I said earlier, is just a C tier card. I'm going to put it roughly around Flick-Flack. I think these are all sort of cards here in this little common attack area of C tier that just sometimes get in because you're desperate. That's fine for them to be here. I don't think they need to do much more than that. You definitely need these kinds of cards in the pool. They have some things that can make them better. Like, for example, if you have Snecko Skull, Poison Stab gets a lot better. If it comes upgraded, it does a lot more damage. Like, poison upgrades, having one number of poison is very relevant because the damage numbers go up by a lot more than just 1 when poison's involved. It is important to look out for that, but it's not something that I want to be picking in the end game almost ever. Basically never that it gets picked inside of like Act 2 and 3. I think I'd have to be very, very desperate. And I'm desperate even inside of Act 1 to pick this, which means it's just not a card I'm happy to see almost ever. Next up, Pounce. 2 energy, deal 14 damage. Next skill you play costs 0. Pounce very often reads 1 energy because you can basically think of this as play Pounce and then play a skill that costs 1 energy, like a defend or a backflip or something. And 1 energy deal 14 is a very respectable rate. It also has some other interactions like Pounce Nightmare to discount very expensive skills. That can be pretty cool. I think overall, this is just a card I'm happier to pick up than a lot of these common attacks that I've just briefly mentioned, and definitely something I'm more happy to pick up than something, for example, like Dagger Spray. So I'm going to put it in B tier. I don't think it ever really scales into the endgame super well, even if it's just a free card in the end game, -1 draw is not really worth it. Like I mentioned earlier, Backstab sometimes is not a good card in the end game, and that's basically always free, right? Unless you have Snecko. And while Pounce does slightly more damage, it's just not going to be free as often as Backstab is for obvious reasons. If you have Snecko, it gets better. But again, I think Snecko on Silent is just not very good, and you very rarely want it. Sometimes you can be quote-unquote forced into it if your other options are really bad, which does happen more often now with the Darv changes. You do see kind of the garbage energy relics alongside it more often now, so you could be forced to, or not forced, but incentivized to pick a Snecko, I should say. So yeah, Pounce is a decent floor, decent ceiling. I don't think ever going to be super exceptional in either, even when it's discounting something like Nightmare. It's basically like getting a free card or maybe 1 energy extra off of like playing a Nightmare, and Nightmare is not something I'm doing very often. So yeah, doesn't have a crazy ceiling. I think by definition, this is something I'm happy to see inside of Act 1. Falls off pretty quickly and doesn't get picked up later in the run very often. Next up, Precise Cut. 0 energy, deal 13, deals 2 less damage for each other card in your hand. It's pretty easy to dump 3 cards in your hand. If you're not playing draw cards or whatever, and you're just playing like strikes and defends, this very often just means that you're playing this with 1 card in your hand, 1 other card. And so it deals 11 for 0, which is pretty good. That's very comparable to Backstab. Obviously, you can loop it, like it doesn't exhaust, and you can play it for the full damage at 13, especially with Survivor or Prepared or other cards that allow you to discard cards. I would say most often you can read this as 0 energy, deal 11 though. It's pretty comparable to Backstab. I think Backstab has a very notable power differential in that it's always drawn on turn 1. And it's very often that you do want front load on turn 1 to kill an enemy and wipe off some sort of AoE fight, right? Like get 1 minion off the screen or something to stabilize fights. Precise Cut's not doing that job nearly as well as Backstab, and so I think it's just going into B tier. I could probably be convinced to put this over Dagger Spray. No, maybe over Pounce, but definitely not over Backstab. I think the ceiling of this card is just not nearly as good as Backstab. When you do not want Backstab anymore, it does exhaust. And that's really important in the end game if you're ever seeing your second draw cycle, is that you don't just draw a bunch of attacks. Again, attacks become the worst cards very quickly. And while we're going through all of them, I think it's very important to be able to look at these cards and then realize that it's not something you want to be redrawing very often, or not something you want to be drawing in the end game especially. Okay, next up, Predator. 2 energy, deal 15 damage. Next turn, draw 2 cards. This used to be uncommon. It is now common, which I think... Silent getting a common card that reads deal 15 damage and draw a bunch next turn is very strong. This card definitely got better because now it is something you pick up on early floors and you're very happy to see, and even in the end game is not completely useless. Again, Snecko's a consideration here. Liquid Memories, potions that discount cards, things like this. Energy Potion can combine nicely with this on the turn that you play it and also on the turn afterwards after you play it. And it can just allow you to push damage in really meaningful ways. Inside of a lot of fights that kind of punish you for not killing quickly, this card's exceptionally good. Not only is it damage, but it's allowing you to draw back into your good damage faster and kind of draw through the block cards that are not relevant. Again, I'm going to mention the giant statue inside of Act 1, but also like the frog parasite that you really need to kill quickly and takes turns off. Predator is a card that is very good when the enemy takes a turn off, because very often that means their next turn is very scary, and playing Predator allows you to set up for your next turn. Spire is very important to recognize these concepts of playing a turn where you set up and then a next turn where you need a lot of output. A lot of people, I think, don't value these sorts of effects very highly, but Predator honestly would be a worse card if it said draw 2 cards this turn rather than drawing next turn, because you don't have the energy to spend. After I play Predator, I only have 1 energy left, and it's very often I'm going to draw into cards that I want to be spending that energy on and not be able to do that. So it's kind of nicer to see all your options at the start of the turn when you have all your energy and can make a better decision or a more informed decision, rather than draw the 2 cards and then only have 1 energy left to play. So I think Predator is something I'm extremely happy to see inside of early game. It kind of falls in the same category as Flechettes and Pinpoint to me, and notably it does work okay with Flechettes. If you see like Predator and Flechettes on floor 1 and 2 in either order, it's kind of just good, and then your damage is sort of solved for the early game. I think I will put this over Flechettes just off of the nature of it being a common card and it being something you pick up very often inside of early game. Obviously, in the end game, it sort of falls off pretty hard. another example of why Leading Strike is so high up on here is it's just a common card and it solves problems for you immediately, and you see it basically every run. So when a common card is doing a huge role like that, it's getting a huge bump on this list for me. Okay, next up, Ricochet, 2 energy, slide, deal 3 damage to a random enemy 4 times. This card you can just play for the 2 energy cost, and it's acceptable sometimes. And notably, multi-attacks like this, as mentioned earlier, do have the potential to snowball really hard if you get something like Miniature Cannon or Strength or an enchantment or whatever. There's a lot of things in this game that work really nicely with those multi-attacks, and Ricochet is something that if you have like a prepared in your deck, can very often be played for 0 energy. But I think it's important to note that, again, when you see this word sly on it, it doesn't mean it's always going to play for 0. You need to think about the turns where it doesn't do that. This card is something I'm okay with playing and could be very happy playing for 2 energy if you get sort of these high rolls, which, again, I do want to point out how good it is to leave yourself being 1 away from seeing something broken. Like, have the opportunity to see one thing that sort of fixes the run, and you're going to be a lot happier. If you're 2 or 3 cards away or 2 or 3 relics away from being broken, it gets a lot harder to piece together a deck that's very strong and can snowball. Ricochet can very often be the thing that's like 1 thing away. You see 1 more relic, you see 1 more card that works with this in a really good way, and it becomes super, super good. As a common card, I think it just gets a bump from me. This is B tier, but probably towards the top here. I might move Backstab up just looking at this. I think it's nice to be able to look at all the attacks here and just sort of reframe the tiers here. But I think it's okay if Assassinate and Backstab are in the same tier, just Backstab being lower than it. I do think this card probably is better than Flechettes on like floor 1. I would probably pick both on floor 1, but Backstab with more frequency. Backstab also over Predator most of the time, but Predator is a common card. I will move it over Pred, I think, but Predator definitely deserves to be talked about since it is a common now and you see it so often, to keep like a ranking here. I don't think it should be bumped down to B with the rest of these cards. It kind of has a higher floor than Ricochet does, Predator, but a lower ceiling. However, inside of early game, I don't think I very often care as much about that. That's usually a bonus that gets tacked on as like maybe it can be broken later. I usually care more about how well does it perform with like nothing else in the deck when I see it on floor 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that. And that is weighing more heavily into my evaluations, I think. Okay, next up, Skewer, X cost, deal 8 damage X time. So if you pump 3 energy into this, 24 damage, pretty easy to understand here. Has a notable high roll of having Chemex, but I think overall, this is really just a dense card that gets picked up inside of early game, and outside of that, not very often. I'm not like picking Chemex and then picking Skewer afterwards, really. I think if you're picking Chemex because you have like a Malaise or something really broken to be doing with it, it can be strong, but very often is outclassed by a lot of Shiv cards, for example, like Leading Strike. And I think that's just why Leading Strike is at the top of this list for me here. This is similar to Dash in my head in terms of power level. I do think it's a C tier card. Very quickly, it gets to a point where Skewer is just never going to get into the deck. It would basically have to come green or have some additional synergies to warrant it. And inside of early game, when I'm picking a lot of these attacks, it's very often outclassed by a different card and does not scale in the same way that something like Flechettes does. That's relatively comparable in terms of being a multi-hit card. There's a couple of multi-hit cards, and I think you just don't need very much to make Skewer work, but it just doesn't do as much as like a Ricochet that's been enchanted, or a Ricochet that's played for 0, or a Flechettes that's being played alongside 4 or 5 skills, right? And so the high roll is just not really as big. Even with something like Chemex, Silent doesn't really make a lot of energy, and so these X-cost cards need to have high impact even when played for low cost, and notably Skewer doesn't do anything at 0 energy even when upgraded, and at 1 is just a really mediocre attack. So you need to have, for example, trouble against killing like 1 enemy in an AoE fight. Say, for example, the eels inside of Act 1 that I want to burst 1 down. Skewer can do that very well, especially with potion support like an explosive pod or something, because the shield does not go in between the hits. So you can do 24 damage uninterrupted. And if you have a little bit of chip, like 1 strike on an eel, you're going to kill it immediately. So it can do good stuff. Can also play it for 0, I guess, to increment like nunchucks ornamental fan and things like this. So it can do things. Playing it for 0 is a real thing, so it has some extra utility, but it's just not got all that great of a ceiling. Okay, next up, Slice, 0 energy, deal 6 damage. Very, very simple card. I think Silent has better things than this for the most part. It is not a horrible card, especially at just making progress while blocking. Again, I mentioned this earlier where Silent can often sit around and sort of just block fights and needs to make progress somehow with anything. That can be poison, that can be fumes, right? That can even be like playing Neutralize. I distinctly remember a run where I played Nightmare on Neutralize to solve my elite damage. And that's basically like playing a Slice at that point, just like slightly worse, I guess, and requiring some extra steps. But I think that was off the back of a transform into Nightmare early. I didn't really pick that. Slice gets into the deck if you just don't have anything else really, and you see it up against like Skip or some mediocre cards. I'm probably picking this more often than most of the C tier stuff, so I could definitely see it being like in C tier somewhere here and getting a little bit of a boost because it is common. Can help you do stuff. It's just not impactful enough of a draw, especially later, to really be doing anything, so it's pretty much early game only and falls off quite quickly. Again, it's 0 energy, so you can sort of just play it, but that's often not good enough to be consuming 1 draw out of your deck. Next up, Strangle, 1 energy, deal 8 damage. Whenever you play a card this turn, the enemy loses 2 HP. This is sort of like Leading Strike if it was bad. How often can you really be playing a million cards after playing Strangle? Well, you have Shivs. That's really the use case, right? And in that case, I would hope that you just have Shiv powers or some other way of scaling your damage. Strangle is just not that. It doesn't have the ceiling that the Shiv cards do. I think notably it can strip Artifact, but most of the time at best this is like 12 damage in the early game, which is just not as good as a lot of these other cards that are just doing this but with less conditions and have a higher ceiling. Kind of just definition of C tier for me. It's enough damage. It's sort of like similar to Memento Mori, but will pretty much always outclass Memento Mori. So I think I'm just going to throw this into C tier and call it a day without much explanation more than that. It's a very simple card. Just compare it to Blade Dance and you will see, or Leading Strike or whatever, that it's just not doing very good. Next up, Sucker Punch, 1 energy, attack, deal 8 damage, apply 1 weak. Silent does appreciate having weak chain on the enemy. You can sort of count the number of cards in your deck. Earlier I mentioned with Grand Finale, like counting 17 cards being 3 turns of your rotation, right? If you have a 3-turn deck where it takes 3 turns to cycle through the whole thing, Neutralize even while green only lasts 2. And so you will essentially never have weak chain or permanent weakness on the enemy without additional weak sources. I think Sucker Punch out of all the weak sources is kind of the worst one. That doesn't mean that it's a bad card, but it's outclassed by the other ones. And so very quickly when you have weakness from other places, Sucker Punch just no longer gets in. It's not really relevant in terms of dealing damage. It is really picked for the weakness, and the upgrade is solid. It just goes up a turn in weakness, but can become very, very irrelevant extremely quickly, especially with something like Suppress, which is just your upgrade to Neutralize. Then you never really need to pick weakness again, except in the case of like Aeonglass where you need to strip the artifact or etc. This card is C tier for me, but top of C tier. We can go ahead and just give the weakness keyword the respect it deserves and bump it up a little bit. I don't think it's really necessarily solving a lot of problems for you, but it is notably one of the few attacks that you can justify picking in endgame if you notice your weak chain is very incomplete and you're not able to maintain it. Okay, we will briefly talk about Suppress here. This card is extremely strong, but it is not inside of the regular card pool and replaces Neutralize. The upgrade being notably extremely powerful, guaranteeing turn 1 weak, and works really well with something like Assassinate. You can actually just use this as sort of an insane backstab that doesn't fall off at all, and loop this card as well. I think Suppress is quite strong. I'm not going to put it on the tier list because it's not in the card pool, but we can just say that it's a very good card and definitely S tier. Okay, next up, the Hunt, 1 energy attack, deal 10 damage. If fatal, gain an additional card reward, exhaust. Few things are better in this game than just seeing more cards. It's a card game, you just want to see cards, right? That makes a lot of sense. The Hunt is basically allowing you to convert early game strength, if you are strong early, into late game strength. You are able to block fights, and so now you can play the Hunt with some reliability and just always see the good card rewards. And if you always are just seeing good card rewards because you're seeing a ton of card rewards, your deck is always going to be good. What the Hunt does essentially is says you don't have to be worried about your endgame if you are strong now. Even if you cannot land this every fight, it is still exceptionally good. Getting an additional 4 or 5 card rewards out of this thing inside of an act is enough. And it also has a really broken interaction with the bosses, where if you get the kill in a boss with Hunt, and it can often be worth paying almost your entire life bar, like literally just don't die, but I would pay 60 or 70 life to hunt a boss. I think that says something, because you're just getting an entire extra rare reward screen. This also can work with relics, like stuff that gives you gold or HP when adding cards into your deck, right? Can work with a ton of other things to become exceptionally broken, but even at its floor, it's just extremely, extremely good. This is very easily S tier. We will put this over Leading Strike. I think it's not really gonna need much explanation. Why just seeing more card rewards is really, really strong, and maybe just better than an attack common. What you'll notice here, I think, is that most attacks are just not very good. In the context of this tier list, I will say. You need to pick them, but they are not going to be solving your runs for you most of the time. They are cards that you pick because you need to pick them, and not cards that you pick because you want to pick them. Basically, every deck, if it was allowed to skip every attack, it probably would. You could construct a deck that does very broken things without attacks in them at all, but the way Slay the Spire is designed is you need to pick these things. Just very often they do not become relevant for the entire run, and they very often fall off, which is why they kind of, with this tiering criteria, end up in the way that they do. Let's move on to skills now. So first up is Acrobatics, a very beloved card. It was recently changed from common to uncommon. It says 1 energy, draw 3 cards, discard 1 card. Acro at common served a very different purpose than I think it does at uncommon. They obviously do the same thing, but the frequency at which you see Acro, I will just say that Acro and Prepared are probably the 2 best discard enablers in the game, aside from a few other things that we'll get to, but best like things that are repeatable, I should say. They're the easiest way to actually build a deck that tries to do discard stuff over and over again. It being uncommon makes the entire package worse because of the nature of discard being a combo oriented style. You need to reliably find part B with part A. And very often, Acro and Prepared want to come first before the Sly cards because they are standalone good cards. Nothing about that has changed. But the fact that you have to see an uncommon now, or like at least one of the cards that was core to this identity, is now uncommon, makes it a lot less frequent that the whole package comes together. And so while the card is really, really strong at doing that exact niche, I think it just comes together far too infrequently now to really set out on a run and start speculatively picking discard stuff that you want to do. You're going to have less of a good time, I think, if you try to like force discard, which is something we could actually do in the early patches of the game and inside of Spire 1. But there's been a lot of changes to Sly, and I think overall the whole package has just been nerfed too much to really care that much. Silent in general really struggles with energy. Acro without energy or without a payoff is not that great. I think Spire, if you come from like a Magic the Gathering background or whatever other card game, you probably look at like draw 3 cards and you go, whoa, right? Like Brainstorm and Magic the Gathering, famously a really, really strong card. And that just says draw 3 on it, put 2 back on top. This is better than that even, but I think that the context of Slay the Spire is really that you draw 5 cards a turn, and in Magic you draw 1, or in Riftbound or whatever card game you want to compare it to. Most of these games you're drawing 1 card a turn, and so draw effects are very powerful in those games. And in Slay the Spire, if you just pass your turn, you draw 5 cards. It makes it way worse to just draw through your deck, especially because there are often cards that you cannot miss, and you discard your hand at the end of your turn. So the evaluation of draw going from game to game can be kind of misleading for a lot of people, I think. If you cannot actually spend your energy efficiently and you're like drawing into powers, and let's say you want to play multiple powers and the cards that you draw, after spending 1 energy on a character that very often only ever has 3 to work with, you often just miss stuff. And I think Acro, now that the whole Sly package is worse, means I just pick it less. Like against other cards now, Acro is not always just a slam dunk, even if I see it super early. I mean, especially if I see it super early, it's not really a good card. Early on in the run, you're just drawing into strikes and defends with it. And so you're not actually getting output out of it. you're just drawing into more stuff. But if you're not actually trying to draw into anything or combo off at all, you're not really going to get much out of it. The upgrade is really strong. One extra card is very powerful when you're discarding one card, and very often if you're playing Acro, you want to do something like Acro into Flechettes. Having more cards in hand means that combo lands more often, and the reason for picking Acro is, again, these like sort of combo ideas. So if you're playing this with like Corrosive Wave or Calculated Gamble or whatever it is that you want to be doing with it, the upgrade is generally very, very powerful. I will just say I think this is an A tier card now. I don't think it is quite as good, and it's not as universal as it was. I am going to put it, I think, roughly here above Pinpoint, below Assassinate. And that may come as a surprise, but I think just the whole package being worse means that Acro is just a worse card. Even though the function of it and the text on the card has not changed, the nuances around Acrobatics mean that it's lower for me. And we can talk more about that as we get to more and more of the Sly cards and brush on the changes that those have had, and also the impact that something like Aeonglass has had, which I've already mentioned earlier in this video. Okay, next up, Adrenaline, 0 energy, skill, gain energy, draw 2 cards, exhaust. The upgrade goes to 2 energy on this. I don't need to really explain this, right? This is just one of the best cards in the character, very clearly. Over skip, it's basically always added unless you have Snecko, and even then it probably is still added. Essentially almost never negative. I think the only time you could say it's even remotely negative is like against Aeonglass and against Dorito, but even then, let's be honest, it's just too good. The effect is just too strong. Pretty comparable to Brightest Flame, and we all know how powerful that is as a boss relic, essentially. If you want to just compare those, if you are confused for some reason, then yeah, very obvious. This is just a really, really good effect. And you do have the ultra high roll of making this non-exhausting. If you get that event inside of Act 3, you could clone it, etc. Cloning Adrenaline sort of just turns it into a win if you can do any sort of like loop at all. Any sort of card you can just draw a bunch of times and play over and over and over again, well, you're going to be able to do that. So you can sort of just play whatever you want, like Flechettes, Adrenaline, whatever. It literally doesn't matter. Basically anything you can play for damage is going to be absolutely broken with this. Essentially, it's just always good. You basically never skip, like 99.9% pick rate. The only time you don't pick it is when it's up against other rares that actually solve output for you and you really need them. Okay, next, Anticipate, 0 energy, skill, gain 2 dexterity this turn. This is a card that you can pick if you are having problems scaling block, like say you did not find footwork. Let's say you have a lot of draw, say you have Pale's Blood or Fiddle, whatever. You have any sort of like native draw with relics or whatever it is to line this up with defense cards, because alone this doesn't do anything. When you draw it with other blocks, it can be very strong, and the upgrade did recently get buffed. It goes to 4 now. So if this comes green, it can be very, very strong. You can essentially just read this as block 4 for 0 energy, and sometimes have a higher ceiling than that. Sometimes this can block more. Let's say you get dodge and roll. You can anticipate dodge and roll, and that will carry over for the next turn and then block 8 total with the upgrade. So if you have any sort of thing that multi-blocks, maybe you have a droid on cards or whatever, and just like a lot of blocks in your deck in general, or you have problems making progress with that energy, if we mentioned a lot throughout this, which Silent does have, this can sort of be an energy card for you. It can sort of regain energy, because instead of now playing a 3rd block card in your turn, you just play 2 and you're good, and then you play a 3rd card on damage or whatever. I think it has a spot. I would say it's not getting picked very frequently, but when it does get picked, it performs pretty well. In Underdogs especially, I sometimes add this if I've seen like no block cards throughout the act, and I just need something before the elite or whatever. It does give you an amount of output that you can like block the Terror Eel, for example. It can be a very, very strong upgrade and gets better with additional draw, as mentioned earlier. So if you have like a backflip in the deck, gets pretty decent. I would say most of the time it becomes unnecessary the second you see footwork or any other way to scale block, like with relics, smooth stone, whatever. You just don't need this to meet the thresholds that you need to meet to block for a long time. Maybe an end game, but an end game, I feel like there's better things to be doing. Usually you will have powers by then. So I think this is just like kind of definition of a C tier card. Has its spots. It's probably going to go at the top of C tier for me. I do like this card a fair amount, but I don't think it's very, very powerful. So let's go ahead and move on. Next up is Backflip, 1 energy, skill, gain 5 block, draw 2 cards. I think this card now is pretty convincingly just better than Acro. It's still at common rarity and scales with all your dexterity, as mentioned, like if you had to anticipate or whatever. But also like footwork, any dex, that you get from your relics, as mentioned earlier, it's just very convincingly better. I think honestly that I will just go ahead and put Backflip into S. It's probably going to sit closer to the bottom, to be clear, but it being a block common and something that actually like I want to spend energy on this. Very often, if Acro's in my hand with other block cards, I cannot really play Acro because I need to spend the energy on blocking unless you have some sort of combo with Acro, as mentioned. But Backflip just doesn't need very much. Probably first copy over skips just always gets in, I would say. Works well with Pinpoint, works with Flechettes, works with basically whatever. I mean, it's just draw on a defend. But that is a pretty decent card if it comes green, if you have Fernell Lens, whatever. Just an exceptional card. Scales well throughout the game. Maybe you do see energy, it's just going to get better and better. Very little needed to work with it, and I think overall I'm just kind of happy to pick block cards on this character in general. Next up, we have Blade Dance. 1 energy, skill, add 3 shivs into your hand, exhaust. The exhaust thing is kind of making this worse, I think, than Leading Strike, for example. There's some reasons why you would like this to exhaust, some relics, namely, Joss Paper, whatever. Most of the time, I think when you want to like pick a card like this and upgrade it for damage, you want to be able to replay it. And unfortunately, Blade Dance is not getting replayed because it says exhaust. So I think Blade Dance in Spire 1 was upgraded very frequently, and in this game is not so frequent. If you have the Shiv stuff, it's very good, especially early on, first couple of Shiv cards. I will say be careful not to overpick just Shiv cards when you have Shiv synergies. You're better off kind of like keeping the deck like 2 or 3 Shiv cards and drawing into your accuracy earlier or whatever it is, Phantom Blades, you name it. Blade Dance is also just an okay card to pick up early. It just says 1 energy, 12 damage. As mentioned a lot throughout the attacks here, that's a pretty decent rate and you can direct that damage. However, scales 3x with strength. Again, works with all the relics that work on exhaust stuff, works with all the Shiv things. Kind of just a great card early and gets out of the way when you don't want it. If you do see accuracy or Phantom Blades and stuff, it opens us up to be immediately winning. And as mentioned earlier, being 1 card away from being immediately strong is a very good position to find yourself in. And Blade Dance is very often putting you into that position where you can just see the Shiv powers and then suddenly your deck's damage goes up by a lot. Obviously it exhausts, so you do want some other sources of Shivs, but it is sort of just a bridge card that gets you to where you need to go. This is pretty clearly just A tier for me. Most of the Shiv package I think is just very strong now, especially after discard got nerfed. I'm just picking these things way more often. I'm kind of just slamming the Shiv powers on sight now, and it seems to just be winning. So we'll throw that into A tier and move on. Next up, Blade of Ink. 1 energy, skill, add 2 Inky Shivs into your hand. Inky Shivs are just Shivs that deal additional damage. 1 damage now, it got slightly nerfed, and apply weakness. And weakness is very good. Shivs are very good. I don't think it's hard to understand why this would be a very, very exceptional card. This is, even after nerfs, just very, very strong. And it doesn't say exhaust, so you can sort of treat this as just like a Giga Blade Dance. Also works well because these Shivs are enchanted. If you have like the Mystic Lighter, that they're doing a lot of damage. It's basically like you have Phantom Blades on every single proc of your Shivs. So Blade of Ink can be your damage solve, but it also just is a huge utility card, strips multiple layers of artifact at the same time, which is very important. And yeah, just exceptional card. I think this is close to the Hunt, maybe even above the Hunt. I'll throw it below for now. I think the meta scaling is a little too strong on a Hunt to warrant moving that at all. But yeah, just very, very strong. A lot of parallels you can draw to this and a lot of the earlier cards mentioned, so I don't feel like I need to go into it too much, but yeah, great. Okay, Blade Symphony is a multiplayer card. I'll briefly mention it. I think it's still really, really strong. After having actually played a lot of multiplayer now, I can say that even in 2-player, this is very powerful. It really wants the upgrade now, but the more players you add, the more broken it gets. And as mentioned before, a lot of Shivs have really broken interactions with Exhaust and things like Dark Embrace, Feel No Pain, whatever. So yeah, really exceptional card, probably like A tier or something. Okay, Blur, 1 energy, skill, gain 5 block. Block is not removed at the start of your next turn. Silence has now, I think, a harder time finding access to Retain because Waylaid Plains is now rare. And Blur is sort of saying Retain just in a different flavor. And especially with bosses that hit you hard on like 1 turn and not the next, and vice versa, Blur is allowing you to carry over energy and also block into a turn that demands a lot of output. Say, for example, the crabs, there's sort of a weak turn, and then the turn after, the right claw hits you for a lot of damage. And Blur is helping a lot there. Aeonglass, this is also true. test subject also true, especially when you can split the test subject and change his phase over. You can blur on that turn, hold block for the first turn before you're able to consistently apply weakness on phase 2 or 3 and cover your bases there. So if you have a lack of draw consistency, if you have excess block, if you have any dexterity at all, really, Blur becomes exceptional. I think overall I like this card a lot. It's not picked super early just because you're looking for damage, and this is essentially just defend inside of the early game. It's not often you're overblocking inside of early game very frequently, but it very quickly becomes extremely, extremely strong. Many decks can sort of solve endgame block, and also like Queen, for example, like the first turn when Queen actually becomes active, she hits you very hard for 45, and Blur can help prepare for that turn. So if you just have consistency issues, Blur is helping there. I think this is just very easily going into S tier for me now. It's kind of a card I've grown to like more and more as I've played. Inspire 1 was nowhere near as good. But in this game, the consistency is so nice, and the enemies don't actually hit you as hard, so you're able to retain block more. We also have the change to Diamond Diadem, and Blur is the same effect. And so if you have Diadem and you're carrying over a lot of blocks, say from your boat relics, even like Anchor, Horncleat, Captain's Wheel, you can sort of carry the block over. So if you have any block from relics at all, I think it's a really good signal to pick up Blur. But I feel like most decks will benefit from a Blur throughout the run at some points. It will become better as the run goes later usually, but sometimes it can be very good against maybe Waterfall Giants or even the Fish. Lots of bosses. So yeah, don't sleep on it. I think it's really strong. I could see cases for just saying it's A tier or whatever, but I'm fine either way. I think it's clearly somewhere in this area. Bottom of S, top of A doesn't really matter. Next up, Bouncing Flask, 2 energy, apply 3 poison to a random enemy 3 times. Poison has gotten a tiny glow up since last making this. I think this is still one of the worst poison cards. I don't think it's the worst, but I very frequently try to not pick poison cards unless I've seen something else that is actually giving me a sign to want to do it. Say, Snecko Skull has a really cool interaction with this, but most of the time this is a card I'm actively trying to avoid and skip. It is just not doing enough damage the turn that you play it, and is overall clunky and going to be really difficult to actually get down. I would have a hard time putting this D tier again. I think it's still probably better than most of the stuff, even in the bottom of C tier, but it is not a good card by any means. It solves long fight damage for you if you need it, at the cost of probably taking damage the turn you play it. So I think we'll throw it in C below Dagger Throw, something like this. It's something you can pick if you need. It's just very expensive to play and rather difficult and clunky. Okay, next, Bubble Bubble, 1 energy skill. If the enemy has poison, apply 9 poison. You are doing poison stuff more often now. There's more cards that apply poison, and there's more good cards that apply poison this time around than before. Bubble Bubble, I think, is a card that I will pick if I have like Twisted Funnel, if I have other poison that's reliably getting played. It's just a very good rate. If you compare it to Bouncing Flask and there's no other outside interactions and you don't care about like Bouncing Flask stripping artifact multiple times, which is something you can care about. Bubble Bubble is just doing Bouncing Flask, but for 1 energy instead of 2. So obviously it's much better. It's more conditional, but if you have Well-Laid Plants, if you have Pyramid, whatever, it's always going to land. It's frequent enough that you do have these things if you have a tiny deck and are just cycling and have like 1 poison card and just want to apply a ton of poison on the enemy. Bubble Bubble is like basically the most cost efficient way to do that. So if your main damage plan is involving poison, Bubble Bubble is probably going to be good. It's obviously awful as a standalone card. It doesn't do anything, but even just a poison potion can mean that in a fight where you really need this to work, it's just gonna work. And in other fights, if you happen to miss it because your draw order doesn't quite cooperate, it's not so bad. I think Bubble Bubble is probably just B tier for me. I'll throw it somewhere around like Pounce and Dagger Spray. I don't think it matters too much, but cost efficient for what it's doing, and in the deck that wants it, it's very, very good. Other than that, you're skipping it. So rather polarizing card, but I think that speaks to landing pretty roughly where it did. Okay, bullet time. 3 energy. You cannot draw additional cards this turn. All cards in your hand are free to play this turn. If you have Fiddle, absolutely disgusting. Cheat out your entire hand. If you have something like Backflip or Acrobatics and you are drawing into bullet time, you are going to be very sad. you need to upgrade it. It will cost 2 energy, and then you can play your draw card into bullet time and be happy. Until then, it's going to be a very, very sad card. For the most part, this reads like get 1 energy. If you think about what you're doing most turns, you're drawing 5 cards, and most of those cards most likely are costing 1. Some of them are costing 0 and 2, but I would say on average a card costs 1. That's just based off your starter deck, and also if you have like high cost cards in your deck, you're likely to also have lower cost cards. It's very often that you're not going to wind up in a situation where bullet time is allowing you to cheat a bunch of high cost stuff, because you shouldn't have a deck that's all high cost cards most of the time anyways. If you have Snecko Eye, this gets really good. Again, there's a lot of use cases for that. I think to me, this is just sort of C tier. It's very infrequent, and this is good. I think it's very clearly better than Strangle, and probably better than Murder, and probably better than Grand Finale and Flick-Flack. But very often it can just not cheat any energy at all. I think Silent just has better ways of getting it. If it comes green, or you have these aforementioned things, you have Pale's Blood, whatever, obviously it gets way better. If you just draw more cards, it's just turning into more energy. So please be aware, even though it's in C tier, if you have these synergies, it's going to be a lot better. Again, tier lists are not indications of how good the card can be, just how often it is. And most of the time you are not going to have these synergies when you're being offered this thing, like end of Act 1 or whatever, and need to pick it. There are other ways to get energy. It is sparse on Silent, and so I will not say that it's never going to happen, but the other energy generation stuff is usually better. Okay, next up, Burst 1 energy. This turn, your next skill is played an extra time. The main use case for this Inspire 1 was Burst Catalyst, and that sort of won the fight immediately. This game does not have that. I don't think there's very many skills that you can just say, if I burst this, I win immediately. And now that Well-Laid Plans has been moved to rare, it's going to be even worse. Burst, I think, unfortunately, very often reads block 5 for 1 energy. Very often the best use case for it is going to be bursting a defend, especially inside of early game. So instead of early game, this is like a card that you're not really happy to see, and speculating on it does not become very strong. A lot of things that you can burst, it acts as a second copy of like the best skill in your hand, I guess. And that could be a Blade Dance, but how good is a rare card that just says play Blade Dance? Probably not that good. It also has a lot of draw order dependency issues. If you draw it with no good skills in your hand that you want to burst, again, it could be a defend. It could be even worse than that. It could literally read do nothing. I think burst is just pretty bad in this game, unfortunately. I still think it's like better on average than like Grand Finale. But yeah, towards the bottom of C tier, I think the ordering doesn't really matter that much. These are all just like generically kind of bad cards most of the time with some high ceiling. Okay, next up, Calculated Gamble, 0 energy skill, discard your hand, then draw that many cards, exhaust. Calc Gamble just says dig really far into your deck to find your powers and do whatever else you want to be doing. And with the change Inspire 2, it now says retain on it. And yeah, it does not lose exhaust. And so before Inspire 1, you could sort of do Calc Gamble looping decks and go infinite, and also abuse things with like Tough Bandages and Tingsha to do damage or block or whatever, and activate all your slide, discard, synergy stuff. Now that Calc Gamble exhausts, your deck is not consistently doing that. And so earlier I mentioned that like Acro and Prepared are kind of like the best at doing repeatable stuff. Calc Gamble just isn't repeatable in the same way anymore, and so it can't actually like be used in your engine really. It's to get set up. That's its main function. This is less so a discard card and more so like that's an extra effect, and the main thing is just draw a bunch of cards for free. And that's essentially just Acro but better. I think Calc Gamble is very clearly just S tier card. It doesn't need a whole lot of synergy to really just do a lot. Drawing for free, activating discard synergies on the side as a bonus is really nice. Can help increase the consistency of picking things like Reflex and Tactician. You don't need a whole lot to ever make this good. It gets better with additional draw. So let's say you have Backflip already in the deck. You can play Backflip, then Gamble, and Gamble's going to draw an additional card. That's pretty cool. You can also do stuff with like Blade Dance into Calc Gamble. Like you don't play the Shivs. You just throw a bunch of Shivs into your discard pile because you just really care about getting your powers down or whatever. And you can sort of min-max your draw that way at the cost of maybe bloating your redraw. But yeah, Calc Gamble, always sort of positive pickup. There's very few times where I don't want it. I think Fiddle's the most obvious one, but I had a run where I used Calc Gamble with Fiddle just to discard Withers and Aeonglass and not draw any cards. It just literally read discard my hand, and it was still a good card. So it has a lot of utility on top of just being generically very strong, which I think just warrants a top slot. Okay, Cloak and Dagger, 1 energy, gain 6 block, add 1 Shiv card into your hand. Shivs, again, are just really, really strong. And with Phantom Blades, you really only want 1 Shiv. The upgrade makes it go to 2 Shivs, which is enough with Phantom Blades to sort of just be like a ton of damage and also very easy to pick up early because it reads block on it. I think like floor 1, I just slam Cloak and Dagger on sight. Any Shiv card just sort of gets in except for maybe Up My Sleeve. The rest of them are all pretty powerful, and this is no exception here. So I think this is just A tier for me, probably like bottom of A. Any sort of dexterity makes it way better. Any Shiv synergies makes it way better. And again, it's just a card that puts you like 1 card away from being really strong, and that's worth a pickup, basically. Next up, we have Concoct. This is a multiplayer card, so we're not really going to talk about it. Overall, I think it ends up not being very good in 2-player, but that's the multiplayer mode I've played the most. A little too Disneyland, needing things to go really right. It can go really right, but it's just often not worth adding. There's better things to be doing on your own. If you have 4 people, then I can see this being quite okay. But yeah, probably like C tier in my head. Not going to place it again for multiplayer reasons. Next up, Corrosive Wave. 1 energy. Whenever you draw a card this turn, apply 2 poison to all enemies. I think, unfortunately, if Calc Gamble was unexhausting in this game, this would actually be pretty decent to do something like Calc Gamble and Reflex and play Corrosive Wave, whatever, and turn this into a lot of damage. Corrosive Wave, especially upgraded, can read a lot of AoE poison, like 9 poison to all enemies or something, from an Acro that's unupgraded and has the ceiling of being way better if you get like Acro and Calc Gamble. I've had this before. I think it's very often that you will see this up against other rares and then not pick it. It just doesn't feel like I'm really adding as much draw into my silent decks as I was before, just because Acro has moved to uncommon, as well as this just being sort of a card that says do nothing unless you draw it with other stuff. So you need a critical massive draw to really activate this, and it's not strong enough to speculate on it. It really only happens in runs where you transform into it. I think that's when I've had it happen for a few reasons. One, transforms basically remove base cards out of your deck, so it makes it easier to line up these combos. And so if you get it off a transform, it can work really well. If you're actually adding it to your deck and you still have all your base cards, you're just not going to draw it alongside your draw cards often enough to actually have it do anything. And for that reason, I think it's just C tier. It just doesn't work often enough. I think it's probably close to burst in my head, so I'm just going to throw this somewhere here. C tier is kind of going to be loosely ordered a bit here, but just not a very consistent card, and also the payoff is just not worth it even when it does line up, except in very niche scenarios. Next up, Deadly Poison. 1 energy, skill, apply 5 poison. This is one of the worst options for poison in the game, unfortunately. Deadly Poison just needs the upgrade to really apply a meaningful amount of poison, and without that, it basically never wants to get into the deck. I feel like there's very few fights inside of Act 1, except for the boss maybe, that I really want this, and I'm only picking it if I'm extremely desperate for damage. For me, Deadly Poison now is probably just a D tier card. We just have better poison options now with new cards added. I'm just going to throw this in here and call it a day. Next up, Deflect. 0 energy skill, gain 4 block. On previous patches, I would say this was a bit better. I think now I find myself just picking it less, probably because I'm adding other block cards more frequently, and we also have more access to energy now. With the addition of Dorito and the Aeonglass, I think you get punished more often for adding these sorts of cards that are low impact draws and also skills. And so this is definitely worse than the release patch by quite a bit. Without additional synergies like having dexterity or having nimble on this or something, I don't think it should be added very often. If you have no other block inside of Act 1 and you're in Underdogs, for example, sure. But I'm way happier to add higher impact draws now, especially because of those aforementioned enemies. This is probably just C tier for me now. I think it just really doesn't enter the deck very often. It's close to being B tier probably, but it's just not all that great. Let's drop it below Dash here. I think it doesn't quite deserve to be up next to Sucker Punch and Dash. Okay, next up, Dodge and Roll. 1 energy, gain 4 block, next turn, gain 4 block. This does double proc Dexterity. And if you have something that doubles the amount of block gain, Pale's Legion, it works both turns. So when you play this, you double the amount for both instances, and that's quite cool. There's a couple of things that can do that, namely cross-class stuff, and also like 1 card in Silence card pool that's not very good, but we'll get to that. It's just not a huge deal, but I think this is slightly worse than before. Again, sort of lower impact draws and blocking fights forever doesn't work as well as it used to. I will say against Dorito that this thing does block on one turn and then not trigger the downside the next turn. So you're getting block on 2 turns for basically the price of 1, which does make it a bit easier to play. Like, you can play this the turn before the multi-attack and Dorito and actually block that fight, because that is a really hard turn to block with dexterity if you do not have other things going on or like powers that block for you. Having footwork or whatever makes this card extremely, extremely good. And sometimes you end up in decks that have like 3 dodge and rolls in them. It's basically baby Blur. It can be better than Blur sometimes if you're not actually overblocking, but it's picked in similar spots, I would say. And inside of Act 1, it's just like good enough to sort of pick up. I don't think it's S tier like I would have said it was before, but I think it's probably just very easily inside of A tier somewhere. I think I like Cloak and Dagger slightly more than it, so I'm going to leave that where it is. Okay. Next up, Escape Plan. 0 energy, draw 1 card if you draw a skill, gain 3 block. Again, this is something that was punished pretty hard by Dorito. And also Aeonglass, right? You're just sort of like wasting a card play sometimes to get nothing. And when you don't know that you're going to draw a skill, you very often just don't end up playing this. Those 2 enemies have really dropped this a bit. I still think it's a good card. Instead of Act 1 and in most fights in the rest of the game, it's just free and quite solid. Obviously with Snecko, it's not good, but yeah, probably somewhere in A tier still. Again, not quite S, but good enough for most decks to pick up pretty frequently. Just don't go ham and like go multiple copies of it. I guess if you clone it, it can do something, but like maybe letter opener or something. Okay. Next up, Expertise. Draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. This has been changed on the current beta branch to now give you less draw but retain cards. Expertise in that situation, I think, just isn't enough draw. And again, Silent struggles really hard for energy. I don't think that rework has actually really changed how good this card is. I have not played with it a ton just off of nature of not clicking it. It just doesn't read that well to me, but maybe I'm missing something. I'm down to be proven wrong on this. In my head, this has not really moved the needle at all. So unfortunately, I think we're going to throw Expertise into C tier. Oftentimes when you want to draw 2 cards or something, like compare it to Backflip, you would rather just have the guaranteed effect of blocking, because you know that you can accept 5 block as being enough to sort of solve the turn even if you draw into nothing. When you play something like Expertise or Acro or something, you really need those draws to solve the turn. And unfortunately, I don't think this is enough draw to really warrant that. Most other draw cards that are considered good do something alongside it that is a desirable effect. Say, for example, Pommel Strike. Obviously, it's on a different character, but doing damage is just good, right? Sometimes you just need to do damage and the draw is an afterthought. Expertise, its main function is just to draw. And so if it's not solving, then it's not really going to be all that exceptional. Next up, Expose, 0 energy, remove all artifact and block from the enemy, apply to vulnerable, exhaust. This has really cool interactions throughout the run, namely the bug inside of Act 2 that burrows into the ground and you need to break its shield. I'm forgetting the name, but that just completely knocks him out of the ground and immediately stuns him. Expose has a lot of utility in random spots like that, but I think the biggest thing is that it strips artifact. And this lets you apply weakness a lot earlier. Also, vulnerable is a good keyword. So yeah, basically free vulnerable and artifact strip. There's a lot of enemies that have a lot of artifacts in this game. Mecha Knights, a lot of the enemies inside of Act 3, like the cubes or whatever. The Aeonglass is like the biggest one. Just bursting down an enemy and being able to strip shield is also relevant. There's more enemies in this game that apply block than there was in Spire 1, so that effect is more desirable. I just think overall Expose is an exceptional card. This is just easily S tier, I think. I don't really think I have to explain much more behind that. Aeonglass is just probably the toughest enemy in the game, at the moment at least. And Silent has the tools to deal with Aeonglass, but you do need to be thinking about it most of the run. This being a very, very strong card into Aeonglass is exceptionally good. Definitely stronger than it was. And we're doing more stuff with physical damage now with Shivs, so we care more about the vulnerable than we did before as well. Okay. Fade, skill, retain another player gains 6 dexterity this turn. This is a multiplayer card. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I don't think it's super good. You generally don't want to be playing cards that don't do anything for you unless the effect is really good. And unfortunately, that's just not that good. Briefly talking about flanking as well. This says enemy takes double damage from other players this turn. That is more along the lines of effects I'm talking about. That's exceptionally good. This is probably just S tier. We're going to briefly move on with that. This is not a multiplayer tier list. Okay. 1 energy, hand trick, skill, gain 7 block, add slide to a skill in your hand this turn. Unfortunately, again, there's just not that many skills I care really about cheating out. If this had power or any card type, now we can talk a little bit, but the payoff is just not worth it. And the floor is okay. Like 7 block is fine, but needing to draw this alongside a discard card that you also want to play and then also have a skill that you want to cheat out is asking for a lot. That's 3 cards in your hand, specific cards usually, that you need to draw together. Most time this card reads 7 block. I don't really want to add a generic block 7 card into my deck throughout most of the run. This is probably just D tier for me. I think there's ways that you can make this stronger. It can cheat out energy sometimes, but it is wildly inconsistent doing it. And I think the times where you have that be good, not very frequent. Okay, next up, Haze. This says 3 energy, Sly, apply 4 poison to all enemies. This has been changed on the beta branch. Haze on the beta branch reads, apply 4 poison and 1 weak to all enemies for 2 energy. If you are coming from Spire 1, you might realize that is very close to another card that we had called Crippling Cloud. There's a couple differences. One, this does not apply 2 weakness at base. You need to upgrade it for it to apply 2 weakness. And also the upgrade goes from 4 to 6 instead of 4 to 7. The energy cost is the same, but very notably, this card does not exhaust. So I think Haze as a beta branch card is actually exceptionally strong. AoE artifact strip is very powerful, and especially applying 2 layers of AoE strip is even better. But notably, this is kind of doing 2 things that work well together. When you are poisoning the enemy, what you want to do is sit around in the fight and let the poison tick down. And how do you do that? Well, you need to block. How are you blocking? Weakness, right? So I think this card just has built-in synergy that makes it much better than a lot of other poison cards, and I think this maybe is one of the best poison cards, if not the best. It's definitely up there. Crippling Cloud is a card I really, really liked inside of Spire 1, and I think it's just a better effect inside of this game, to be honest. Very, very strong upgrade. This needs to be upgraded basically immediately. I think as an unupgraded card, it's not super strong, but the upgrade is exceptionally good. So definitely a card I think most decks want. Weakness is just very strong effect, and this is just a very good way of getting it. So I think we're just going to throw this into like top of A tier here. Big Crippling Cloud enjoyer, and I think that has not changed inside of Spire 2. Next up, Hidden Dagger, 0 energy, skill, discard 2 cards, add 2 Shivs into your hand. Very comparable to Leading Strike with some additional upside. So this one discards 2 cards. I think oftentimes you play this last and you just end up discarding 1 card out of your hand. It can discard a Sender's Bane and be kind of annoying in that way, but most of the time the discard is not why you're picking this. It's just an added upside. Really, you just pick this to say 0 energy, make some Shivs. And again, Shivs are really strong. This is a very, very good card to see early. 0 energy, again, letting you make progress while also blocking and doing other things. Works well with draw cards, can activate those discard synergies, and also importantly in Aeonglass, getting rid of 2 cards is very good. Usually when you have discard effects, you want them to be paired with draw effects because you need to be discarding specific cards, but certainly in Aeonglass that is not really true. Like you're just getting rid of withers and they always appear in your hand. Hidden Daggers now is just easily S tier. It is definitely better than Leading Strike. I think even as uncommon compared to common here. I'm just going to throw that right above there and say that this is definitely just like one of the best Shiv cards in the game. There's a lot of very good Shiv cards, but this one is extremely, extremely good. Okay, next up, Knife Trap. 2 energy, play every Shiv in your exhaust pile on the enemy. Before, in the previous version of this tier list, we didn't really have much of a use for this. You just didn't need to do it. Shivs were not even really the dominant way that I was doing damage most of the time. Now that is not true. One, you need the damage. Bosses need to die now. Aeonglass is extremely terrifying. Test subject has been buffed. That is also terrifying. There's a lot of reasons why you need to push damage, and also the fact that the Shivs in general have gotten better and more picked means that you're going to have this be a good card and not just a speculative card way more often. Knife Trap now is just a boss killing card that doesn't need very much. If you're playing 2 energy to like throw 10 Shivs at the enemy, and that's buffed with accuracy or something, that's extremely powerful. That can proc a lot of synergies with your relics, as mentioned earlier. Just insanely good. The upgrade's pretty solid. It says upgrade all those Shivs when you play them, which can do some stuff. Like Mystic Lighter is the big one, or sorry, mini cannon. But yeah, Knife Trap just way better. Just for context reasons, like the game surrounding it has changed a lot. The card text really hasn't changed, but everything surrounding it has made this just a better card than it was before. I think honestly that I'm going to put Knife Trap at like bottom of A. If it's not good yet, you should probably consider carrying it around just for the boss. It's going to be pretty rough in hallways, but if you have like 3 Shiv cards or like 2 cards maybe, even let's say like a Blade Dance and a Hidden Daggers and a Leading Strike, like that's not asking a whole lot from your run. You're going to have that fairly often. That Knife Trap becomes very good, and I think it just performs super well at the role that it needs to do. It can like literally one-shot test subject phase. You can scale it during Queen, like while the minion is alive and easy to block, and then burst the Queen down. You can use it to kill Aeonglass before the Withers overwhelm you. Silent just needs tools to deal with those fights, and I think this is pretty good at doing that. So much better than it was last time. Let's go ahead and move on. Next up, Leg Sweep. 2 energy, apply 2 weak, gain 11 block. The upgrade's very good, extends weakness, makes the block number go bigger. I don't think I need to explain much. I think we've already talked about how good weakness is a keyword. Blocking and applying weakness at the same time is really just reading a big block number, like bigger than what the actual block number reads. Leg Sweep has always been one of the best cards on the character. I think that has not really changed at all. You need to apply weakness to make it reasonable to block most enemies, and I think this card is just exceptional. So probably just throwing that above Hidden Daggers. Definitely close to one of the best cards in the character. The whole S tier is obviously just insane cards, but the top tier of S tier is even better than the bottom by quite a bit, I would say. Okay, next up, Malaise. X cost, skill, enemy loses X strength, apply X weak, exhaust. The Dorito is an enemy that a lot of players I think struggle with pretty hard. Malaise is solving that fight very easily. You basically play it once, and then for the rest of the fight, the Dorito is not really going to hit you for very much. The multi-hit is really the turn in that fight that is going to be problematic, and Malaise solves that. A lot of bosses, like the Queen, for example, either the minion or the Queen can be debuffed to a point where the multi is just not doing anything to you. And those are the scary hits. Test subject, same deal. The multi's in phase 2. That's extremely scary. Aeonglass has a multi-attack. Basically every scary fight in the game has a multi-attack except for a handful. And even if the enemy's not multi-attacking, reducing their strength can meet some really good thresholds. You should pay attention to the rounding on weakness here. Do a bit of math to figure out how to appropriately use energy into this. Sometimes it can be not all that impactful to use like all 3 of your energy. Sometimes it only needs to be like 1, sometimes 2 is best. Figure it out if it makes any sense. I would recommend looking up the enemy patterns and kind of seeing the numbers and seeing what enemies maybe would benefit from this. Notably, if you are vulnerable, Malaise is getting more effective. So against Queen, when you're debuffed and the enemy hits you for 9/5, what is really happening is Queen is hitting you for 6/5. And so when you Malaise it, that number goes down and the vulnerable amount on you is going to be doing less damage, right? So Malaise and weakening the enemy's strength and weakness in general can just be really, really powerful. This is easily S tier. Don't have to talk very much about it. Okay, next up is Mirage. 1 energy, gain block equal to poison on all enemies, exhaust. On the beta branch, this no longer says exhaust on it. And so if you are doing any sort of poison damage with any amount of consistency, this is a card you can loop to actually scale block. That makes it much better because very often Mirage was a card that wanted to be played later into the fight, and it could not be looped once you've already scaled, and it meant that it wouldn't actually stabilize the fight for you. Now that's not true. You can sort of just loop this, and you can also play like Mirage into Blur or something to gain a huge amount of block. The fact that it works on AoE is quite nice. Even if you have like 1 tick of fumes and enemies have 9 poison because there's 3 of them, that's still a respectable block card with a much higher ceiling than it was before. I still don't think very often that I'm going to be picking this. There's better ways to scale block, but it has a lot more spots than it used to have, just off of the nature of being a block engine now, really, that I can set up and sort of keep playing over and over, and maybe store block throughout turns. And this can be like my big jumpstart enabler to getting those big numbers. So I think we're going to bump this up probably to like top of C tier. I think it's still too niche by a little bit, but definitely not D tier like it was before, not completely unusable by any means. Okay, next up, Nightmare, 3 costs. Choose a card. Next turn, add 3 copies of that card into your hand. Exhaust. Nightmare is most frequently used for output solves. And what I mean by that is you're going to be nightmaring powers. You're going to be nightmaring something that increases your top end in the fight, because obviously it's very expensive. Inside of hallway fights and short fights in general, you generally don't play this at all. You just skip it. It's just a curse. And so early game, it's very bad to carry this around. It's basically doing nothing. As mentioned earlier, I have done like Nightmare Neutralize with like some draw cards to solve my damage. That is very fringe, and that was a transform. But it can do some stuff. You sort of need to have a target in mind when you're doing this. If you see Alchemize at a store or something, that can be game breaking. Nightmare goes infinite. You can make infinite nightmares and clone cards infinitely inside of your deck. So if you have any sort of meta scaling, that can do some funny stuff. This is a classic from Spire 1. I would not recommend stalling. It is not very fun, but it does exist. So anyways, Nightmare is, I think, not all that great. When you need output, it is desperation solving, but you would almost rather just have extra copies of the power that you are trying to copy or whatever it is. Notably, you can do like Nightmare on Power Potion or something, and that fixes a big problem with Nightmare, in that you need to draw it alongside an actual target. And the main way to make Nightmare good is to have Retain. If you have Well-Laid Plans, if you have Pyramid, those are going to keep coming up a lot, then this card gets a lot better. If you have a bunch of energy cheat, if you have Pounce to cheat it out, sure, we can do some funny things with it, but very often the deck lacks an actual target for this, I find, or it's just not needed. I don't think it's quite D tier, because Aeonglass often demands output, but probably just somewhere roughly below bullet time, I would say. Just most often a curse, like it cannot be played, but has a niche in the end game to solve output. Sometimes bosses like Lagavulin, you can like Nightmare Backstab or Assassinate or something, and it's not so terrible, but yeah, not exceptional by any means. The opposite of that, a not exceptional card, would be Piercing Wail, which is a completely disgustingly good card. It says 1 energy, all enemies lose 6 strength this turn. Exhaust. This reads block for oftentimes well over 20 in a fight. In Queen, for example, this is blocking full 45. In AoE fights, this can be blocking way more. Just a gross card. I think if you just start understanding that this has 1 more interactions, it strips artifact, it just reads block 6 at like the worst case. Obviously, if the enemy has artifact, sometimes it can do no block, but you're at least stripping the artifact. For the most part, Piercing Wail is a card that I want multiple copies of in almost every deck, and just gets better as the run goes on, essentially. Yeah, crazy card. If you do not think this card belongs in S tier, and I could argue that it's better than Malaise, I'm not going to, I think, but the fact that it's a common and impacts the game and enemies that scale with multi-attacks in the way that it does, like it's blocking test subject almost a full turn on its own, is just ridiculous. If you don't think it belongs where it is here, I just really urge you to just start picking every copy and just seeing what happens when you play them, because the Decimillipedes become way less threatening. Every scary fight in the game, this is good in almost. The 3 knights inside of Act 3, it's exceptional. Just in any 3 enemy fight, this can just read at worst 1 energy, block 18. That is a gross number, like a really gross number. Okay, next up, Prepared, 0 energy skill, draw 1 card, discard 1 card. This is probably the best discard enabler and the easiest one, I think, to pick up without having anything else. If I see Prepared versus Skip, I'm pretty much just picking it. I think it does need an upgrade, but again, doing discard stuff and opening up the discard stuff is something that's powerful to do. And even without discard stuff, it can just throw away Withers in the end game. It can just draw 1 card deeper into your deck when you upgrade it and it says draw 2 cards. It just is so, I think, core to Silent's identity and such an important piece for filtering deep into your deck that it's just easily S tier. This card, I think, is hurt by Dorito. Aeonglass, it's kind of positive still, I'm pretty sure. This is probably not better than Piercing Wail, but it is a very good card. I'm going to throw it below Hidden Daggers, I think. It has so much utility throughout the run and just opens up so many things, being really strong. It's really hard to get into Sly stuff without having prepared. It's basically the main way that you can actually do it consistently, like Calc, Gamble, Exhaust. Hidden Daggers doesn't draw cards to line up the combo, so if you're just trying to do combo stuff, Prepared is the card. When it comes green, you basically pick every copy. So if you have Toxic Egg, it's just getting into the deck. If you can upgrade it, it's a very, very strong upgrade. 1 extra draw for no cost is exceptional. Next up, Reflex, 3 energy. Sly, draw 2 cards. This upgrades to 3. It is a very, very good upgrade if you can actually consistently play this for free. And again, Prepared is the main enabler for this thing. Acro with Reflex is not really that good, so this wasn't hurt too much by Acro being moved to uncommon. But Reflex really needs consistency. You never want to be playing this for the 3 energy cost, obviously. So if you cannot activate it, it's a bad card. If you can, it's free draw. So really this comes down to how consistently can your deck do this. And there's a few use cases where this becomes really good. One is you have a small deck and you have like multiple prepareds, like 2 and maybe an Acro or a Count Gamble or something. You have like 3 sources of discard. That's like kind of the bare minimum, I think, for wanting this to be like actually good. At 2, I'll consider it just because I'm very close to having it be broken. The other is Tools of the Trade. So with Tools of the Trade, after it's in play, which obviously you still need to draw into it, so it can brick you in your first cycle. But after Tools is in play, Reflex is free draw. And that's obviously very strong. So if you have tools in the deck, Reflexes becomes very consistent and just sort of extremely strong inside of long fights and just gets into the deck. I don't think this is S tier anymore. The whole Sly package is just worse than it was, and I can get into it less often. I think, if anything, we put this at like top of B now, maybe. It is a little bit sad how much worse the Sly package is now, but I just find myself doing it so much less than I was doing it on release. Okay, next up, Scare. Apply 1 week to all enemies, exhaust 0 energy. This card now was reworked and renamed into Sidestep. So we can sort of talk about that here since it's the actual card is here, which is beta branch only. So if you're on the main branch, then I guess we can say that this card is just says weakness on it. It's not so bad. It's not the best way to apply weakness, but it probably belongs somewhere in like B tier or something. It's free and strips artifact. So how bad can it be? But yeah. Sidestep reads 0 energy, next turn, gain 1 energy. Sidestep is a card that I think most people will recognize as an analog to Outmaneuver from Slay the Spire 1. And this card is basically meta defining for Silent, I think. This single-handedly is like one of the only cards that actually solves energy on Silent. You can do stuff where you sort of play Sidestep and then use that to play more draw cards the next turn to play more Sidesteps, and then repeat this loop, and every single turn you're playing more draw cards and then more Sidesteps and so on. And you sort of go exponential. You just get to scale by stacking more and more Sidesteps, which allow you to draw into them again and again. The upgrade I think is really important. Having 2 extra energy versus 1 is a huge deal. But just being able to play a 0 cost card that says next turn gain energy for Silent is so incredibly important. If you remember earlier, we have stuff like Malaise, we have stuff like Predator, we have stuff like Well-Laid Plans. We have a lot of cards that just benefit from having energy and don't necessarily need it the turn that we actually play it. Sidestep is just incredibly good for Silent, and I think we were really missing something like this. This overall is probably one of the biggest changes that came out of the most recent beta branch patch, is having this put back. And we have an Outmaneuver analog because in this game it's so good. Silent just really needs energy so badly and gets so much stronger. And I guess we can sort of talk about Snakebite after this because they work really well together, and that definitely bumps up Snakebite's evaluation for me. But Sidestep I think is easily just S tier. This card is game warping. You really want to have explosive turns in this character, and this allows you to just slam draw cards and actually play them and turbo through your deck essentially. It lets you set up really massive turns. You can do something like Nightmare Sidestep and actually be able to play all the cards that you nightmared, for example. Lots of things just work with this in a really nice way, and Silent very often has very expensive energy requirements that she cannot really pay for any other way. Like Blur into a bunch of block cards on one turn is so powerful. That's just one example of something you can do with this. it just gets more and more broken the more I play with it. I think it's just one of the best cards on the character now by a lot. Okay, we'll talk about Snakebite here and skip a little bit ahead here because I think these two work in tandem. When you have Snakebite in your hand, it's very hard to actually play it, but with Sidestep, much, much easier. You can sort of just say that it pays for your Snakebite next turn, and then this becomes a thing you can play, and this can activate your bubble or whatever. And now we actually do care way more about having poison damage inside of bosses. The Aeonglass is just a very demanding enemy in terms of output, and this can be something you need to be doing. Not that I'm like in love with Snakebite or anything, but I think this is much improved. It does sort of need the upgrade. If it comes upgraded, it's a lot better. Bouncing Flask, unfortunately, doesn't have Retain, right? And that's the main thing that Snakebite has going over it. If you just compare the two numbers, it's worse. It strips less artifacts, does less damage. Bouncing Flask is kind of better in that regard. But the fact that you have Sidestep now, and this says Retain on it, and it's a common card, means that if you're just lacking for damage, Snakebite can just get in. I don't think Snakebite's exceptional. I'm going to put it in B tier. I'm still trying to avoid picking it like inside of early game, but I think it's worth a mention that it's gone up for me, and I'm not shy to admit that. There's just a lot of context around the game has changed to the point where that is now a desirable effect or a more desirable effect than before. Okay, let's jump back here to Shadow Step. 1 energy, discard your hand, next turn attacks deal double damage. We had a very similar effect to this inside of Spire 1, and it was complete garbage. You do not want to be discarding your entire hand. Obviously, now Well-Laid Plans is less common, so we don't have to worry about that as much, but this has a very big problem of you don't know what your next hand's going to be. And if you draw and pay for Shadow Step, and then next turn you do not see any attacks, you have a big problem of you just wasted a card and energy. There's no real way to guarantee that your next hand is going to have attacks to actually play, and you definitely don't want to be flooding your deck with a bunch of attacks to make Shadow Step work consistently. It's really clunky. Double is a crazy thing to put on a card. And so for that reason, it has its place. If you are desperate for damage, you can pick this. And especially with the upgrade, by discounting the energy, it becomes way more playable. But definitely do not want this with Pyramid or any Well-Laid Plans sort of effects. Discarding your hand is not what you want to do. I will note that you can use it to discard Withers and Aeonglass. Again, that is like something that has to be talked about because of how run warping that enemy is. But it's not something I care that much about to warrant putting this in like a higher tier. I think it's similar to Nightmare for me, probably like a little bit above it. A lot of these rares are just pretty bad, but worth mentioning that they have their places, and that's kind of cool when rares can be bad, but still useful in certain spots. Okay, next up, Shadow Meld, 1 energy, double your blocking this turn. This card, again, suffers from something pretty similar, where you just need to draw it with a bunch of other stuff. And it kind of reads like a card that we already went over that says 0 energy, gain more block for blocks played. This obviously works with more stuff. You don't have to use just the dexterity to increase your block gain on cards. Like certain relics, this can amplify, right? Let's say you have tough bandages and you can discard cards. This will actually still work. So it can do some more fun stuff. I, however, think that Shadow Meld very often reads I block 5. If you're hoping to draw Shadow Meld plus like a better block card or multiple block cards, again, we're starting to get into territory of just not very likely to happen. That becomes kind of problematic. Or you just don't want to spend all your energy on all those cards anyways. So it can very often just read not all that well. 1 extra block, you can just draw a defend instead. It can do stuff, especially with the upgrade, and can do things if you have a lot of draw, for example, and can consistently play with a lot of stuff and you don't have access to like footwork or other ways to increase your actual block output. It's worth a note that this is sort of more desperation to be able to do that. But yeah, not all that crazy good or anything. Definitely just C tier card, probably similar to Shadow Step under Bullet Time for me, probably. Maybe I'll bump Bullet Time up a little bit just because it looks a little bit weird next to P-Stab. But yeah, not all that great in general. Okay, next up. Storm of Steel, 1 energy, skill, discard your hand, add 1 Shiv into your hand for each card discarded. Shivs are better now, and so this card got a little bit better. And also, Aeonglass is giving you fodder in your hand to actually discard, so you have more stuff, and the discard effect is desirable and less picked on other cards now. So Storm of Steel is slightly up. Usually this is not actually resulting in more Shivs than like a Blade Dance or even a Leading Strike. Sometimes it's 1 Shiv, and 1 energy for 1 Shiv is a very bad card. You need a lot for this card to really be all that good. It has some utility like discarding the statuses inside of Act 2 as well that the mites add to your hand, but overall, I think Storm of Steel is still in a pretty bad spot. It's probably not D tier anymore, probably bottom of C for me, but not all that much to talk about here. It's just like, if you have Shiv stuff and you have a bunch of extra cards in your hand and you have nothing else to do with them and you don't have any energy to play them, sure, that's about it. Okay, Survivor we're going to step over since it's a starter card. And we can talk about Tactician. Skill. Sly, gain 1 energy, costs 3 normally. The upgrade goes to 2 energy, which makes it much better, doubles the effect on it. And obviously you want to be playing this for free. I will say that you can do that with Sly, or you can do it with something like Pounce, which is cool, or discounting it to 0 with a potion. This very often is pickable with Acro, and 1 more Sly Activator, prepared, whatever. Tools of the Trade makes it 1 energy or 2 energy when it's upgraded. On the turn you draw it with the tools. Obviously it has the same problem as Reflex, is bricking your first draw to actually get the tools into play, and if you draw them in the same hand, also doesn't work. But overall, I think just kind of worse than Reflex most of the time. If you brick this, it's obviously just doing nothing in your hand. Same thing as Reflex, but I think the actual ceiling of Reflex is higher. Draw is generally more powerful, I would say, for free than energy gain. You have way more ways on this character, especially to abuse it, with combo potential and a lot of ways to discount cards for free with other Sly cards. Tactician, I think, is just slightly worse than Reflex in this game still. Same as Spire 1 probably, and probably just like bottom of B, maybe just C tier. Honestly, at this point, we're just picking the discard stuff so much less now. And if you are doing the discard stuff, you're not doing like tight looping decks with it. They're just standalone decent cards. Again, Tools of the Trade, big shout, but you know, that makes most Sly things pretty okay. Speaking of more Sly things, Untouchable, 2 energy, Sly, gain 6 block. This has gone through so much. This used to be one of the better cards in the character. They nerfed the number on it several times. It's gotten so much worse just from the context in the game and also from those direct nerfs, to the point where I think I basically never pick this anymore. This is very easily just C tier somewhere in here. Pretty desperation. Again, with the tools and all these other things, prepared, accurate. You kind of need multiple discard activators. You kind of need tools, whatever. Something speaking for it. I'm no longer just picking this randomly. Closer to release, I was doing that, and it was working out pretty much all the time. So that was when Acro was common and the Sly stuff was really gross and broken, and now it's not really the case anymore. So yeah, I think we're just going to throw this into C tier and move on. Next up my sleeve. 2 cost, add 3 Shivs in your hand, reduce this card's cost by 1. This is bad Blade Dance, essentially, for 2 plays of it. It equals Blade Dance on the second play and becomes better than Blade Dance on the third. Most of the time, you are never getting to the third play of this thing. Fights are not going long enough. If they are, you probably have not scaled your Shivs to be meaningful, and this is not actually going to be a meaningful boss solve by any means. In hallways, you just never want to play it. It's too expensive. There are way better ways to get Shivs. I think this is very clearly just a D tier card now. It really just doesn't do very much at all. Again, all these D tier cards do get picked sometimes, but it is so much worse. It is so much worse now to ever try to justify doing this. I cannot really see it getting added to the deck very often. Okay, let's move on to powers. Next up, Abrasive. 3 energy, Sly, gain 1 dexterity, gain 4 thorns. Very often, this is just getting cheated into play and saying it costs 0 with this card. I have played raw Abrasive for 3 energy and still had it be very good, and the upgrade is quite solid. You get some more thorns. 1 point of dexterity in this game is very strong. It meets a lot of breakpoints and buffs like your dodge and rolls or whatever. It can stack with other dexterity as well to just reach, again, a lot of breakpoints. So Abrasive is just a very, very strong card when you can play it for free. Even when you can't play it super consistently, it can be very strong. The top end output and the damage from the thorns is not irrelevant at all. I think Abrasive is just S tier. This card is very strong. Does want to be able to be played for free, but I'm going to throw it somewhere around here next to Piercing Wail probably. It's a lot of output for 0 energy essentially, and by the time you see a rare card, you probably have like 1 or 2 discard things. You can usually make it work. Even if it doesn't land in every fight, it's not that big of a deal. The fact that it is such a high roll card means that, again, as mentioned earlier, you can sort of just like high roll a fight, save a bunch of HP because like the thorns kill them way earlier or something. It just gets so good. And towards the end of the run, you are very consistently playing it super easily. Okay, Accelerant, 1 energy, power, poison is triggered 1 additional time. This is changed to uncommon on the beta branch currently, which I think was good. This card was Not really all that deserving of a rare, and I think Poison Space, like Synergy Space, needed something. It was just not doing a whole lot, like very boring. It lacked the catalyst of Spire 1. I think a lot of people compare this to Catalyst. I do not think that is really what it's doing. Turning the poison number on the enemy to be bigger is one thing, triggering it multiple times is another, because your poison still ticks down every time it gets triggered. So if you're unable to apply a bunch of poison, then this is not actually going to be doing that much damage. You kind of need to be able to apply a lot of poison. With Fumes and like one other poison card, it's good. With just Fumes, it's not. I think Accelerant's a pretty overrated card. Very often it's just not worth playing, and especially in like hallways or something, you need a lot of poison application, which most of the cards just don't apply that much that you're going to be playing. And if you're only like relying on one poison card to deal damage, then you probably don't want Accelerant. So a bit weird. In the dedicated deck where you have multiple sources of poison, I can definitely see it, and it becomes good. So I can't put it in D tier just because it has like an actual use case. And especially at Uncommon's a bit better now. I think we'll throw this like probably around Bouncing Flask tier and move on. Okay, next up, Accuracy. 1 energy, Shivs deal 4 additional damage, upgrades to 6 additional damage. This card is really, really good. I think with Knife Trap especially, Knife Trap doesn't scale well with Phantom Blades, which is like one of the other Shiv powers that is really important, but does work really well with Accuracy. And I think Accuracy is one of the main ways that I just feel like I have enough damage for the run. Multiple copies of Accuracy get in. It's just picked even without Shivs in the deck very often. It's so worth having. It's just a way to open all the Shiv stuff as being super good that it just gets picked blind with nothing. Very easily S tier for me. I think Accuracy has had such a huge glow up here, and Shivs have just gotten so good that it needs to be there. Next up, After Image, 1 energy power. Whenever you play a card, gain 1 block. This is basically super footwork. Can be worse than footwork in some situations, but again, with Shivs, very often you're going to be making a lot of block off of each card, like 3 or 4. You might think this number is rather inconsequential, but it is a very, very important card for silence block capabilities. There's other ways to scale block, obviously, but this is one of the best ones, if not the best one. I think this is very easily top of S tier here. Maybe not like the absolute best card over Adrenaline, but pretty dang close. It's probably second for me currently with what we have listed here. Very important card, extremely run warping. The upgrade is amazing, goes to an 8. Yeah, just really, really impactful card for Silent and makes me feel so much safer into the end game. Works with so many things. Just randomly getting blocked for everything you do is so good. Next up, Envenom. 2 energy. Whenever an attack deals unblocked damage, apply 1 poison. Envenom is extremely slow and expensive. And unfortunately, without Sly to like cheat it into play, and especially without the upgrade reducing its energy cost, now it just increases the amount of poison. I think Silent has a hard time playing this. Like, we did get energy tools now, but it's a lot harder to put this into play than if it just comes randomly and costs 1. If you have Snecko Skull, like this upgrade is just kind of worse because this is basically what Snecko Skull is doing, and that was the main reason it was picked inside of Spire 1, is you had Snecko Skull and Venom. It does scale Shivs, but the main way of scaling Shivs is just doing accuracy stuff. If you don't see that stuff and you need to strip artifact from the boss or something, sure. It's kind of just worse accuracy for the most part. I think the main way that you're actually doing unblocked attack damage is just Shivs now. And so when you compare it to the other Shiv powers, this is expensive and just not all that impactful in general. I think it's like D tier, probably top of D tier, but yeah, extremely infrequent. Okay. Phantom Knives, 2 costs. Shivs now hit all enemies. Add 4 Shivs into your hand. Once again, Shivs are better. I think this you can sort of read as Blade Dance and single target fights, obviously, but Blade Dance plus. And that's okay as is. I don't think you really need to upgrade. It just goes to 5 Shivs here. This is something that can be played inside of Act 2 and Act 3 and still do a lot. And if you have accuracy and other ways to scale it, it can be pretty important. Silent can have a rough time doing AoE damage in general. And I think that this is an okay option. It's overcosted and not renewable Shivs for the most part. Like, I would be kind of happier, I think, if this just said 0 energy or 1 energy and made no Shivs and just had the effects written on it. But the fact that it does have this effect written on it means it's standalone and you can just pick it even without stuff. So if you see it early game, you can just pick this and it just says 2 energy, deal 16 AoE with higher upsides, right? So Eventually, you might get to the point where you just don't want this in the deck. If you see it early, it's just okay. Probably just good even, but quickly falls off in the end game. You don't really need the AoE, but it can kill like the knights or something. When the game changes a bit more and maybe Act 4 has an AoE fight or Act 3 becomes harder or something, then I could see this. Right now, I don't feel like I'm really struggling in Act 3 with AoE encounters. I'm kind of just like bursting down one of the guys with my Shivs, and that's fine. So you don't really need this all that often, but early game, way better. I think I'm just going to move this into like B tier probably. I think it's probably just better than Dagger Spray for obvious reasons. It's just like bigger number and better synergies. Probably closer to the top of B tier, right? Yeah. Okay. Next, footwork, 1 energy, power, gain 2 dexterity. Dexterity is incredibly strong in this game. I don't think anyone needs me to explain that. Block is very good. And this is one of the main ways that you can actually stabilize fights. If you see this early, it trivializes most of the game. Most of the enemies will just never hit you again after you deploy it. And even the turn you do play it, it can sometimes block more than playing like 3 defends. So you can play like footwork and 2 defends. If you have the upgrade, it's better. It makes frail rounding much, much better. If you have no dexterity, your defense start blocking for 3. If you have footwork plus, your defense will block for 6, which is literally double value. And quite a few enemies in the game throw you. So I think footwork overall is still just easily S tier. It's not quite as good as After Image, but we're going to put this pretty high up, I will say, over Blade of Ink probably, and move on. Next up, Infinite Blades. 1 cost at the start of your turn, add 1 Shiv into your hand. This is extremely good with Phantom Blades. I think basically 2-card damage solve for most of the game until like the end game when you need to do a lot more than just that amount of damage per turn. But if you see that in the early game, it's incredibly good. Even with just accuracy, Infinite Blades is good. Without accuracy, it's still good. If you have like Infinite Blades plus After Image, Infinite Blades plus accuracy, Phantom Blades, all the things I just mentioned, even like Serpent Form, whatever, there's a lot of things that just make this much better. But even still, doing 4 damage a turn for the rest of the fight can be really good with potential for massive synergies. And again, makes progress in the fight without spending energy after the turn you play it. So you can just focus entirely on blocking and drawing into your block and being consistent. Infinite Blades is just incredible in this game. I think I'm putting this very close to Acro, I would say. Generally, just a really, really powerful card to have. Reaches a point where if you have a critical mass of Shivs and you're drawing Shivs every turn, you probably don't need it. But inside of early game and even later in the run can be completely run warping. It's funny how much of a glow up this had since Spire 1. It was already going through a bit of revolution in Spire 1, but yeah, just got so much better in this game. Okay, Master Planner, 2 energy. Whenever you play a skill, it gains Sly. This is so slow. Really expensive to put in play and very often just does nothing. Like I said, skills are generally not the things you want to be cheating out in this game. At least on this character. There's not enough like high impact skills that I care about cheating out, especially not high impact skills that don't exhaust. And Master Planner is very often a complete brick. I think this thing is just easily one of the worst cards in the character, basically doing nothing. Yeah, I don't really understand this card at all in terms of why it would be good. I think it just very often just is not. Maybe I'll have a run with it where it pops off, but I have not had a run yet where it has felt good at all. Next up, Noxious Fumes. 1 energy, power. At the start of your turn, apply 2 poison to all enemies. The upgrade is extremely important to 3. Probably the best poison card in the game. This is very easily going into S tier for me. Fumes is right up there with accuracy in terms of impact. Probably one of the best 1-card damage solves in the entire game on any character. You may read that number as feeling not that high, but you give it the upgrade, it will kill basically every fight in the games with very little help. Obviously, you cannot do literally nothing but play Fumes, but Fumes is getting you most of the way there. So trust this card, just upgrade it, believe in it, it's going to do stuff. It solves so many fights and just provides so much damage in the bosses and artifact strip and whatnot that it's something I'm basically always looking for unless all my damage is already solved. Extremely powerful. Okay, Outbreak. 1 energy, every 3 times you apply poison, deal 11 damage to all enemies. This has been changed on the beta branch. It now reads, and it's rare, 3 energy, apply 9 poison to all enemies, poison triggers immediately. This is a very recent change, and I have not been able to play with this card yet. I just haven't had it. The way it reads to me is pretty okay throughout the early game, and then in the end game becomes sort of a damage doubling effect. Outbreak really reads 18 damage with no synergies. You kind of get your immediate damage from applying the 9 poison, and at the end of the turn, the enemy will also take the 9 poison that you applied. If you have poison already on the enemy, say you have 100 poison on them and you play this, you'll do like 109 damage immediately, and then the tick will happen and do 109. Obviously, if you have that much poison, the fight's probably pretty won, right? But that's just an example. This gets better if you have more poison, but even in the case of having none, doing 18 damage AoE and then also doing damage for the rest of the fight sounds pretty good to me. This can solve a lot. I think the main thing is that you're not able to do very much in your turn aside from just play Outbreak, so you're probably getting hit in the face. But when you have a card that you need to pay a lot of energy for like this, you want it to be fight winning, like at least stabilizing or solving something, and this will solve damage. I think the upgrade's very important on it. The damage number goes up. That in itself is really good. Lethal when you play a card like this is important. When you use your whole turn, you want it to kill something. And it's not dead weight in the end game. Essentially, it's a finisher card, and even just a poison starter card can be fine if you can discount it somehow, or you have Snecko again. There's a lot of ways. But yeah, it reads pretty nicely to me. I think this is probably just like a B tier card. It probably wants to be in early game and needs to be seen relatively soon, but also can be used in decks with dedicated poison damage. And that's pretty nice. Not something you're just going to slam every time you see it because of how expensive it is, but I think this is a much better card than it was previously. Okay, next up, Phantom Blades, 1 energy power, Shivs gain retain. The first Shiv you play each turn deals 9 additional damage. This is one of those Shiv powers that makes the cards, like the Shiv card, just so much better. And it's something worth speculating on even with no Shivs very often. Phantom Blades is exceptionally good. If you have a Blade Dance and you have Phantom Blades in play, now instead of playing your whole Blade Dance in one turn, you can now just play 1 Shiv a turn and have 3 turns of damage covered for Phantom Blades. And so Blade Dance gets a lot more useful with Phantom Blades in play because you can just retain the Shivs. Retaining the Shivs is also just kind of a good effect in general. You can hold them for your after image to block on specific turns when you don't need it to be doing more. You can hold them to play with ninja relics like the Shuriken and the Kunai to proc. So let's say you have like 4 Shivs in your hand, you play 3 of them, you hold 1, you can now use that the next turn to help trigger the Kunai or Shuriken again. So the micro and the ceiling with Phantom Blades is really high. I think this card gets better with player skill by quite a bit. But even without like super high skill played or something, then the Phantom Blades is just doing a lot of damage. And that's like very simply put, like even without manipulating relics and whatever, it's still an exceptionally strong thing, even if you ignore the retain effect altogether. The extra damage is so exceptionally good. I don't think it's as good as accuracy, but to me, this is like easily an S tier card. And it's funny how much better these Shiv powers have gotten, but I'm going to throw it like sort of close to the bottom of S tier here. And we'll leave it at that. Okay. Next up, Serpent Form. Whenever you play a card, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. This upgrade's pretty significant. It goes to 6 damage. This card is pretty just like difficult to play. And again, is sort of bad accuracy. Like the way that you're scaling a lot of damage very often is playing Shiv cards and spamming them. This is just really expensive to do that, right? It can do stuff in decks that are not doing that. And I've definitely picked Serpent Forms going into Aeonglass where I'm desperate for damage. But most of the time, I don't want this in my deck, like especially early game. If you need to kill a boss, it's going to help do that. It's going to be a really good dupe pot target. I've definitely duped Serpent Form into the boss to sort of scale my damage and solve things. It's just a high impact draw when you get it, but playing it is obviously very costly. I think this is better than the last time we made a tier list. Probably just like top of C tier or something. It has a niche as a boss killer, but again, very costly and hard to carry around throughout most of the run. Okay, next up, Sneaky. This is a multiplayer card, but is a very strong one. It says whenever another player attacks an enemy, gain 1 block, Sly. Cost 2. This goes to 2 block per attack other players do, and is essentially just like multiplayer after image that's much more powerful that can be cheated out with Sly. So it would be a very strong card, and 2-player is not as good if your teammate is not attacking very frequently, but you'll know. I would say it's probably an A or an S tier card, depending, but obviously not putting it on here because this is not a multiplayer tier list, once again. Okay, next up, Speedster. 2 energy. Whenever you draw a card during your turn, deal 2 damage to all enemies. This card is horrendous. It's so expensive to put into play. Does not count the start of turn draw, so you have to actively play like Acro and things like that, and Acro is less common. So it really works best with like Count Gamble or something. I think your best bet is getting this off a Power Pot. This card is just not very good. I'm not playing that many draw cards. It's not worth playing this. There's just better ways to scale damage. Basically never getting in the deck. Just gonna throw it into D tier. Probably better than Master Planner, but pretty horrendous. Okay, Next up, Tools of the Trade, 1 energy, power. At the start of your turn, draw 1 card, discard 1 card. The upgrade's incredibly good, goes to 0 energy, and enables all those Sly packages that we talked about earlier. I don't feel like I need to elaborate because we already did mention on all the cards that this is making really strong now. I'm just going to throw this straight into S tier. Drawing 1 extra card a turn is exceptionally good, and not having to pay energy to do that every turn, really good. Not even having to pay energy to deploy the power in the first place, also really good. I think that's just getting up there in the holy trinity of silent rare powers, but yeah, exceptionally strong. We will talk about the next one in a second here. Okay, next up we have Tracking. 2 energy power. Weak enemies take double damage from attacks. On Beta Branch, this does not read double. It says less than that. So Tracking was probably the most broken card in the entire game, or one of them, and still scales Shivs really well. I think if you need a physical damage boost, this is still a very worthwhile card to pick up and play. It is obviously not as instantly run winning as it used to be, but it really just says the enemies have permanent vuln if they have weakness on it. And that's a very powerful effect. So I think this is still S tier. It's not quite as good as it used to be, like best card in the character or something, but it's still exceptionally strong, and you're gonna want to have weakness on the enemy already. It's basically just rewarding you for doing something you already wanted to do, which is have weakness, right? And so when you have cards like that, you don't have to go out of your way to make them good. They're just gonna be good. And so even though the effect is less damage than it was before, still crazy good. Okay, next up, Well-Laid Plans, 1 energy power. At the end of your turn, retain up to 1 card. On Beta Branch, this has been massively reworked. This now costs 2 and basically gives you Pyramid. When you upgrade it, it goes to costing 1. Pyramid is debatably the best boss relic in the game. It's definitely up there if it's not the best. Maybe number 2 now. We just did a Spirecast episode about this, so I guess you can watch that and decide for yourself how you feel about it. But yeah, Well-Laid Plans, just ridiculous card. It was 1 energy go to 0, and they just nerfed it recently, and that was obviously way too strong. I think it's still incredibly strong, still probably one of the strongest cards in the character. It's worth playing at 2 energy, but it's not something you can slam on sight, and I think that's something to be said. But getting Pyramid on this character just trivializes basically every fight. The second it's down, your fight immediately stabilizes. Being able to play your Piercing Wail on the correct turn, being able to play your energy on the turns you need, lining up all your Sly cards, etc. For such a combo-heavy character, Well-Laid Plans has always and probably will forever be one of the most powerful effects on the character, even when it's gone through a couple of different iterations of changes. This effect is just ridiculous. This is very, very easily one of the best cards in the character. It's Pyramid. I don't know what else there is to say. We could even say it's the best card, but I think this is fine leaving it as is. It is a rare card now, so it's just a little bit harder to find. For obvious reasons, the effect has gotten stronger and more costly, but it is, bumped up to a rare to compensate for that. That just means less runs you're going to have Well-Laid Plans, so having Tools of the Trade or having other ways to fix draw consistency is going to be more important, but Silent has a lot of ways to do that. Okay. Finally, we have Wraith Form, which is again not a card I'm going to include in here, but I'll briefly talk about it. It says 3 energy, power, gain 2 intangible. At the start of your turn, lose 1 dexterity. The upgrade is very important, goes to 3 intangible. It is an ancient relic, so you're not going to have it very frequently, and also it comes at a high opportunity cost. I don't think it's like super exceptional in this game, but Wraith Form is Wraith Form. You can Nightmare this, you can dupe pot it, and you basically take nothing for the rest of the fight if the fight lasts like 4 turns or less. So Wraith Form is really, really powerful, but the opportunity cost, I think, is a little bit too steep. Yeah, we don't have to talk about it a ton, but still a good card, just not one of the best. Okay, that is everything for Silent now. Overall, I think Aeonglass made this character way more interesting. The last couple of rounds of patches have mostly been buffs, but I do like the design space choices they're doing with like poison and trying to experiment with some new things and make it a little bit more interesting. I think overall that has made the character more interesting. Until Act 4 is out, we'll just have to see how that shakes up balance, but right now it feels very much like you're just doing Shiv stuff. Act 4 is going to be a while, so I can't imagine that's going to change unless they massively nerf a lot of things or buff other things or whatever. But Shivs just really feel like such an easy way to bridge into damage and to also scale that damage into the end game. And Aeonglass really doesn't punish it enough for how much damage you can really be doing with them. So at least for now, that feels like the dominant way of dealing damage. and the support cards and packages around Silent have just kind of gotten better. You've gotten better access to AoE. Most of your card quality has just gone up with a lot of these changes. The character overall feels pretty strong to me, as do all the characters, but at least she's gotten a lot more interesting. So I did this offline. Let me know how you feel about this compared to the ones I've done on stream. I think I yapped for a bit longer probably this time and like not answered chat questions or whatever. So I'll feel free to ask questions in the comments as always, and I'll get to those. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.